head of the climate conference in Paris. It brings together actors in the form of companies, municipalities, regions, and organizations that give their backing to the declaration that Sweden will be one of the first fossil-free nations in the world. The initiative was expanded and reinforced in 2016 and is now run by an office headed by a national coordinator. Fossil Free Sweden have, with their 450 members, developed 22 roadmaps that it identifies obstacles and opportunities in order to accelerate development. On that basis, Fossil Free Sweden produces political proposals that are presented to the government and brings together actors to implement the measures. Fossil Free Sweden has a unique role between the business sector and politics. Fossil Free Sweden are working with sectors to develop roadmaps, how to achieve the Paris Agreement and our national targets. Sweden will have zero net emission of greenhouse gases by 2045, and emissions from national transport systems will be reduced by at least 70% by 2030 compared to 2010 levels. So the Swedish roadmap for fossil-free domestic shipping has a goal of becoming climate neutral in 2045. And to get there and promote electrification, as an example, the government has reduced energy tax on shoreside electricity to contribute to the development of charging facilities in Swedish ports. Sweden's state-owned ferry companies are actively working on conversion to fossil-free operations, including batteries and electrically driven cable ferries. This is to mention a few examples. And globally, shipping is responsible for about 2 to 3% of the greenhouse gas emissions, but it's growing fast. And greening the maritime transport industries is important. We need to change a lot to have zero emissions from shipping, but in terms of the ship design, new fuels and how the ports are designed, but also to develop policies that incentivize and rewards the early movers. So the Swedish maritime sector has also contributed to the global work and to put forward a proposal to IMO to introduce a levy on bunker fuel that will then go to a R&D fund to help transform the sector and meet the goals set by the IMO, or to even go further. So also this initiative, the government has set clear long-term goals with high focus on innovation and technology. And it's about cross-sectoral cooperation, for example, in the ports. You have to look at not only the shipping and the fuels, but also for renewable energy production if the ships go electric, etc. And all the facilities, including wastewater and waste treatment, and to have holistic solutions in the ports. So we have to have cross-sectoral cooperation with different types of companies working together to achieve a healthy ocean and a fossil-free future. So I stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yesterday, of course, we heard from Minister Lovin about Sweden's commitment to building back better and bluer, she said, from the COVID-19 pandemic. And these were some very great specific examples that we're able to see how Sweden is thinking about doing this. Obviously, to be able to do this, and I'm going to jump into some of the questions, it seems very important that silos have been already broken down between government departments and also between different sectors. And I wonder if you can just speak a little bit about how Sweden has been able to do this in order to take such an integrated approach across government.
Well, I think there are many reasons. For example, the government, when you look at the government, almost all decisions are taken collectively by the government. So there's a procedure where you are checking all decisions with all the departments and ministries that have a stake in an issue. So that's from the government side. And we also have a long tradition working with on the labor market together with the private sector on labor market conditions. And we have been working extensively for a long time with Triple Helix cooperation between academy, business, and the government. So I think it is a way of working that we have been doing for a long time, but it has sort of grown stronger with these types of initiatives, and where we are looking more holistically on issues of great importance for the future.
Thank you. I guess one last question before we let you go. For all of us who are trying to keep the momentum going this year in the lead up to COP26 and using virtual opportunities like this to share solutions and best practices and really communicate with each other, what advice do you have for us? I guess we're all about a year into communicating and speaking this way. Any advice that you have for everyone here going forward to really make the most out of the time before the COP?
Well, not really. I mean, I think it's really important to keep in contact with your allies and like-minded actors. But what is more tricky when we are in this situation is building dialogue with groups or countries or stakeholders that are really not on your side, and try to sort of shift mindsets and so on. And I think you need to have, to do that, I think you need, a trustful and honest and face-to-face conversation. Of course, you can have that virtually also, but maybe not in virtual big meetings. So I think maybe that's the tricky part, to win over your opponents.
Thank you. Such good advice to keep reaching out to everyone that we agree with and those that we don't, and trying to build consensus and greater partnerships. Thank you so much for these remarks and for kicking off day 2. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening.
Great. So we're going to now go into our next session, which is intended to provide an overview of ocean-based climate solutions in specifically nationally determined contributions. And this will include what's been seen to date, and also where there is potential for more to be included in NDCs. So in the chat, you will soon see a link to a recent publication. The title is Enhancing Nationally Determined Contributions, Opportunities for Ocean-Based Climate Action. And to start this session, I'd like to introduce Taryn Franson. Taryn is an international climate change policy expert and a senior fellow in the World Resource Institute's Global Climate Change Program. Taryn focuses on long-term climate strategies and NDCs with a view to leveraging these and other policy instruments in support of rapid decarbonization. She's worked with international governments, many of the hosts of this event today, in fact, on these topics, as well as with a number of NGOs and international organizations throughout her career. So Taryn, thank you so much for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Anna Marie. It's a pleasure to be here, and welcome everyone to our session on ocean-based solutions in nationally determined contributions, or NDCs. My name is Taryn Franson, and I'm a senior fellow at the World Resources Institute, where I lead work on country commitments under the Paris Agreement. And I'm joined on this panel by Olivia Lopez and Mario Finch. Olivia is a Ray Conservation Fellow at the Ocean Conservancy, working with their climate program, where she's exploring strategies to advance ocean climate solutions. Mario is a research analyst at the World Resources Institute and is working on the nexus between NDC enhancement and green recovery, specifically in Latin America and the Caribbean and African regions. What we have in store today is first, I'll kick off with a quick overview of what NDCs are and why they matter. After which I'll turn to Olivia to share some inspiring examples of how countries are including ocean-based solutions in their NDCs. And then we'll turn to Mario to share some lessons from the guidance that we've recently developed, which you can link to in the chat, on how this type of action can be scaled up through the NDCs. Time permitting, we'll have some questions and answers at the end. If you do have a question that you'd like to submit, you can do so through the Q&A feature that should be at the bottom of your screen. You can also upvote questions that other people have submitted, which will help us pick and choose among them when we get to that point. If you need interpretation, I understand that you can choose your language using the globe icon, which should also be at the bottom of your screen. And if you're having any technical issues during this session, please message the host of the meeting so they can help you. Without further ado, I'll go ahead and dive into some initial remarks just on NDCs 101. And I know some of this will be very familiar to those that are working actively in the international climate policy space. But I think it's an important foundation just to think about the context that the rest of the presentation will take place in. So what is a nationally determined contribution to start out? The text on this screen shows kind of the main content in the Paris Agreement on what NDCs are. Essentially, when it comes down to it, the NDC just represents what each party intends to achieve in terms of mitigating climate change. Now, some countries are approaching these very differently. They are nationally determined. In many cases, the content does go beyond strictly mitigation, and certainly ocean opportunities also go beyond mitigation. So we'll get into some of that. But essentially, the NDC is the instrument by which each party to the Paris Agreement communicates what it intends to achieve on mitigation. Why do NDCs matter? This is pretty fundamental, but I think there are a few key features of NDCs that I would pull out. One, they're the basic currency of the Paris Agreement and therefore international cooperation on climate change. They are the instrument by which we can add up what all countries are committing to and understand how close we are collectively to achieve the goals that are laid out in the Paris Agreement, including limiting warming to well below 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees. This is how we see how the efforts of each individual country come together to achieve collective action on climate change. The second is around accountability. NDCs are subject to accounting and reporting, and there's a review process by which how countries are proceeding on their NDCs is discussed internationally. And this ensures that the NDCs will not be sort of a standalone document that are submitted once and never looked at again, but there's actually a process to circle back and see how countries are doing on implementation. The third is on channeling finance, and this isn't a formal role of NDCs per se, but in practice, NDCs I think are often seen as how countries prioritize climate action, and therefore when it comes to, for example, public climate finance, how to decide where that finance will be directed, how to identify where the needs are. And so for countries in particular that do need international financial support or need to channel financing in order to meet their obligations, this is an important way to promote that. And that leads me into the fourth function, which is around policy signaling. I think NDCs serve as a signaling document to show where the country is headed over the longer term, to provide some measure of certainty, not only to financial players, but also other players in the private sector, government ministries, all of those stakeholders who will ultimately need to make adjustments and transform. Stakeholder engagement is also a role that can be played by the NDCs and hopefully should be played. It can provide sort of an impetus for the government to bring many stakeholders together, both across whole of government, but also outside the government, to create a vision and a plan for climate action. And finally, NDCs are instruments that can help jumpstart implementing climate action. Of course, the NDC itself will not ensure that change gets made on the ground, but it can be a jumping off point to make sure that that change happens. So I just wanted to give a flavor of kind of at a very high level where we are on NDCs today. What this figure is showing is what kinds of mitigation contributions countries have put forward in their NDCs to date. The vast majority of NDCs contain greenhouse gas reduction targets. That might seem sort of obvious given what I said about the role of the NDCs as important mitigation instruments, but it's not completely universal. Some countries have sector-specific targets, which might be framed not in greenhouse gas terms, but in terms of renewable energy or limiting deforestation. Some of them list policies and actions. Many of them contain some combination thereof, but mitigation targets certainly are central to most countries' NDCs. NDCs often, but not always, also highlight what countries plan to do in specific sectors on mitigation and/or on adaptation. But this isn't universal. This is where we see a lot of differences across countries in how specific they get about action that they plan to take in each sector. When I showed the last slide on greenhouse gas targets, often that will refer to an economy-wide target that encompasses action across all the sectors, but without necessarily specifying how much of the target will be met by energy, agriculture, waste, etc. So in this slide, what you can see in the yellow are countries that have specified energy-specific sectoral approaches in their NDCs. And what you can see here is actually that's a minority of countries who've specified that. And I wanted to highlight this because I think certainly to achieve anything on greenhouse gas mitigation, almost every country is going to be taking some form of energy action, but they're not necessarily highlighting it as such in their NDC. They may be planning to take action in a specific sector without necessarily, in order to achieve an economy-wide target without getting very explicit about that. And that could be because they want to allow themselves flexibility in implementation, because they want to avoid burdensome reporting requirements, or because they're not quite sure how they're going to achieve their targets yet. And the reason I flag this here is because today we're going to be talking about specifically what countries are doing in the ocean sector. And I just think it's important to have that caveat in mind that what goes in the NDC itself is not necessarily the full suite of what countries are planning to implement, simply because they take very different approaches to the amount of detail that they include in their NDCs. Next, we're going to look at adaptation. So as you can see here, despite the fact that countries are not required to address adaptation in their NDCs, the vast majority of them are, in fact, seeing NDCs as an important document to showcase their plans on adaptation. And I think this is also something that is particularly important when we talk about the ocean and climate, ocean-based climate solutions, because we see, in fact, many approaches that can create synergies between adaptation and mitigation, which is a really nice opportunity, I think, that is particularly salient in this theme. So Let's see. Next, turning back to mitigation for just another moment, I want to call attention here to the emissions gap that exists in the initial set of NDCs that came out in the lead up to the Paris Agreement in 2015. On this chart, which is a little bit complicated, the x-axis is time and it goes through 2030. 2030 is the year in which most countries have anchored their NDC commitments. The y-axis is greenhouse gas emissions. This black circle is where emissions globally need to be in 2030 in order to align with scenarios that limit warming to 1.5 degrees. And this circle is where emissions would be in 2030 under the initial set of NDCs. So we have a big gap to close. And that's why what is happening in this year ahead is so important. The designers and negotiators of the Paris Agreement knew very well that gap was going to exist, that countries were not yet ready in 2015 to commit to the full suite of action that would be needed. So they created in the Paris Agreement a 5-year cycle where countries would come back to the table every 5 years and enhance their NDCs to make them more ambitious. To eventually close that gap. Technically, 2020 would have been that 5-year mark for the Paris Agreement. Of course, everything is a bit delayed due to the pandemic, so we are still seeing some of that activity occurring into 2021, and we'll certainly continue to see it through COP26 at the end of this year. But just taking a quick look at where we are today, the countries in orange are countries that have already submitted these updated NDCs in the lead up to COP26. And the countries in blue are countries that have committed to do so, but haven't done so yet. This chart is now slightly out of date. Certainly as of this morning, the US should also be colored in blue on this chart, and there are a handful of other countries that we are still catching up on updating. But as you can see, there's a great deal of momentum around enhancing NDCs this year, and that is because of that 5-year cycle under the Paris Agreement. So with that, I'll conclude my intro to NDCs, and I will hand it over now to Olivia to share with us some inspiring examples of how countries are currently including oceans in their NDCs. Olivia.
Thank you, Taryn. Just to share my slides really quickly. Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm really excited to further dive into the progress that we've been seeing in terms of countries recognizing the power of the ocean to enhance mitigation and adaptation goals that are so important right now and will continue to be important in the future. To put into perspective the ways that ideas around the ocean have evolved, it's first important to note that historically, the ocean has been overlooked as a tool that can be used in this fight against the climate crisis. And in fact, in the first round of NDCs, most submissions from coastal countries referenced oceans, but only a small fraction included concrete ocean-based climate solutions. And according to a 2016 report from IUCN, fewer than 20% of countries with coastal blue carbon ecosystems discuss their roles as carbon sinks. The good news is that since this last round of NDCs, the ocean-based solutions have gained attention. For example, there was an emphasis on oceans at COP25, which was the first ever Blue COP hosted by Chile. And this meeting resulted in the first ocean decision from a COP and mandated the Ocean Climate Dialogue that took place in December. And the ocean decision text was drafted by Costa Rica and Fiji. The Ocean Climate Dialogue provided a space for parties and non-party stakeholders to further discuss how to strengthen ocean climate action going forward. These signs of progress and growing recognition of ocean solutions are reinforced by many of the enhanced NDC submissions from coastal countries in 2020. As submissions were coming in, I analyzed 27 of these enhanced NDCs, looking specifically for ocean-based solutions. I found that 25 out of 27 submissions that I analyzed contained at least one ocean-based solution, which I found really encouraging. And a number of categories were identified during my review, and these include the following. They include solutions that contribute to mitigation, such as scaling up offshore renewable energy, reducing emissions from shipping and ports, reducing emissions from offshore oil and gas, and protecting and restoring blue carbon ecosystems. And they also include solutions with benefits for adaptation, such as advancing MPAs, protecting coastal communities and infrastructure, protecting coral reefs and other ecosystems, and creating climate-ready fisheries. These were also some solutions, or there were also some solutions related to ocean climate justice, which I was really excited to see, as this is a very important cross-cutting issue to be considered. And to read all about all of the ocean solutions mentioned in my analyses, you can refer to a brief that I've been working on, which tracks these commitments, called Ocean-Based Climate Solutions and NDCs. And that should be available, I believe, in the chat for reference. So now I'll highlight a few ocean-based climate goals from enhanced submissions that I thought stood out as really great models, starting off with Chile, who continues to demonstrate their commitment to integrating oceans into climate action. Again, I'd like to highlight that Chile was the host of the first ever Blue COP, and its NDC overall serves as an excellent model for leveraging the power of ocean solutions. In scope of conserving and protecting coastal wetlands, Chile identifies wetlands or includes identifying wetlands under a national inventory by 2025, establishing new protected areas in underrepresented marine ecoregions with the goals of protecting at least 20 coastal wetlands as new protected areas by 2025, protecting at least 10 coastal wetlands as protected areas by 2030. And Chile also includes that all marine protected areas of Chile created up to 2020 will have a management or administrative plan under implementation, taking into account actions for adapting to climate change. And it will assess and strengthen mitigation and adaptation co-benefits of marine protected areas. Fiji is another nation that continues to recognize the potential of ocean solutions. In an effort to meet emissions reduction targets, Fiji includes reducing domestic maritime shipping emissions by 40% by 2030. Among other adaptation targets, Fiji mentions establishing 30% of its exclusive economic zone as marine protected areas and working towards 100% management of its exclusive economic zone by 2030. Fiji also includes prioritizing nature-based adaptation solutions to mitigate the effects of flooding and cyclones, which are expected to remain a persistent issue. And this was demonstrated, as many of us know, just last month as Cyclone Yasa swept through the Pacific. And Fiji from the beginning has raised the point that the ocean and the climate are not niche issues to be treated separately. And those on the front lines of this crisis really understand how existential and consequential it is. To dive further in this topic, you can read my blog that I wrote called Cyclone Yasa's Destruction in Fiji and What It Means, which can be found in the chat, which I will link it soon, and on Ocean Conservancy's website. So moving on to another ambitious NDC from Costa Rica, whose NDC contained a range of ocean solutions. Recognizing the co-benefits of blue carbon ecosystems, Costa Rica includes conserving and protecting 100% of its coastal wetlands included in the National Registry of Wetlands for the 2016 through 18 period, preventing and reverting loss of coastal wetlands by addressing root causes such as deforestation and degradation, advancing strategies for sustainable management of mangrove areas by communities, and citing the ocean as the principal area of action in its NDC. Costa Rica includes placing 30% of its ocean under an official protection scheme by 2022 and promoting sustainable fisheries into including aquaculture. So with this, I hope that by catching a glimpse of the progress that's been made, we're all encouraged to continue increasing this momentum and head in the right direction. Thank you. So with that, I will hand it over to Mario with WRI to talk a little bit more about specific ocean solutions.
I just about to share my screen. All right, thank you so much, Olivia, for the introduction. I'm just gonna jump right in order to reinforce some of the things that Taryn mentioned earlier and Olivia shared. Recent research by the IPCC has indicated that commitments in the first round of NDCs were not sufficient to limit temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And if mitigation efforts are not ratcheted up, we would lock in a future of irreversible consequences of climate change, including economic and livelihood disruptions, beginning with the 2.4 billion people that live within 100 kilometers from the coast. Now, the level of aggressive actions we need to address climate change requires an all-inclusive approach, which means accompanied by the deep cuts in emissions needed across terrestrial GHG sources, oceans, which are often viewed as a victim of climate change, must play an equal role in helping countries strengthen their climate commitments under their NDCs. Through a collaborative effort in the production of this guide, our team presented a set of ocean-based mitigation targets, policies, or measures across 4 ocean-based sectors that national governments can consider as part of their economy-wide efforts to reduce emissions and improve resilience of coastal communities. When updating the NDCs prior to COP26 or for the 2025 round of updates. And these opportunities include blue carbon coastal ecosystems, ocean and coastal fisheries, ocean-based renewable energy, and ocean-based transport. Now, since ocean ecosystems offer massive potential to reduce GHG emissions, countries should expand protection of these ecosystems, namely mangrove forests, salt marshes, and seagrass beds, which can absorb and store up to 10 times as much carbon per square kilometer as their terrestrial forests. However, once degraded or disturbed, these same ecosystems that we are hoping to use for mitigation can lead to the oceans becoming a net source of carbon emissions once these carbon deposits are released. Blue carbon ecosystems have the potential to remove an equivalent of South Korea's total emissions each year. And some of these opportunities for enhancing this process, countries should use their latest IPCC guidance, which includes mitigation potential for blue carbon ecosystems, as indicated in the wetlands supplement, into the LULUCF sector as a means for accounting them in NDC's GHG mitigation components. They should also be willing to reform fiscal policies to invest and incentivize restoration and protection of blue carbon ecosystems, and commit to providing support for accounting, science, and technical capacity on data collection for policy development. Now, ocean and coastal fisheries sometimes fly under the radar, especially supply chain emissions from transport, refrigerant loss, and waste disposal, which are often included from GHG assessments. Through NDCs, governments can quantify and include non-fuel related emissions from motorized and non-motorized vessels as part of their national targets. And in addition to these fuel targets, improving feed options for farmed fish, encouraging consumption of low carbon seafood options, and promoting ecosystem-based approaches are all ways we can help enhance the resilience and reduce emissions from the sector. Added to that, governments should target fishing-related fuel consumption by removing fossil fuel subsidies in the cases where there are subsidies existing for fishing fleets, and including these measures in their NDCs. Defining energy efficiency targets, which should then be implemented across the entire supply chain, and this can help reduce emissions from post-harvest production, including cold storage and ice production. And they should also consider incentivizing the transition to low carbon or zero emission fishing vessels. Now, countries should work to harness renewable energy potential by expanding offshore wind farms and tidal energy, and the NDC can support the acceleration of this industry by stimulating investments for research in these and other less mature technologies. Increasing ocean-based renewable energy could between 2030 and 2050 could potentially save between 0.24 and 2.48 gigatons of CO2, which is roughly the equivalent of reducing UAE's and Russia's emissions. And in order for governments to make this statement, they should be willing to define absolute capacity and generation targets for ocean-based renewable energy. For example, in the UK's industrial strategy, they have gone from committing 30 gigawatts of offshore wind capacity by 2030 in 2019 to increasing this commitment to 40 gigawatts in 2020. This overall commitment by the UK would lead to an avoided emissions of around 70 million tons of CO2. Additionally, government should develop inclusive marine spatial planning and ocean management frameworks for renewable energy expansion to ensure that ocean-based renewable energy does not negatively impact other ocean resources, such as fisheries. Now, ocean-based transport, our fourth opportunity, is recorded as being responsible for 2.5% of global emissions. Hence, governments should work towards measures that aid in the decarbonization of this sector and communicate them in their NDC. With significant buy-in for the decarbonization of the shipping sector, it could lead to a 0.5 to 1.8 gigaton reduction in emissions between 2030 and 2050, which is also equivalent to Indonesia's energy sector emissions or the US's transport sector emissions. Now, in terms of opportunities, in order for countries to do so, they should be willing to set targets, transitioning their shipping fleet to one of zero emissions. For example, Norway has already enacted a national climate action plan to promote green shipping and commits to a 50% reduction of GHG from domestic shipping and fishing compared to 2005 levels by 2030 as their step towards zero emissions. In addition to that, 8 Pacific nations led by Fiji and the Marshall Islands have formed a Pacific Blue Shipping Partnership, which is committed to reducing fossil fuel use by 40% by 2030 on the path to achieving a carbon-free marine transport sector in those regions by 2050. Government should also earmark funds to be able to aid in this transition, as well as define non-GHG targets for emission phase-out from fleets by 2030. Now that we have presented all of these opportunities, why is this important? What do we do next? With roughly about 3 billion people at risk in coastal communities, governments need to quickly scale up their climate actions in their NDCs. Thus far, only 71 countries have submitted 2020 NDCs, and of the ones analyzed, roughly 25 countries have enhanced their NDCs in order to include ocean elements by the end of 2020. So there is still significant room for improvement. While some opportunities presented in the guide would revolve around gaining adequate investment, including NDC-related ocean-based mitigation and adaptation targets, policies, and measures can send the necessary long-term policy signals and trigger the required levels of finance for research and development and action needed. Hence, there is limited room for excuse. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mario and Olivia. Great presentations. And with the few minutes that we have remaining, I'd like to turn to a Q&A session. I have a few questions in the stack that I'll start with, but then I wanted to invite folks, if you have additional questions, to go ahead and use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we will get to as many as we have time for. So to kick us off, Olivia, we have a question about coral reefs. Could you speak more about how countries are or could be advancing coral reef health in their NDCs?
Sorry, my mute button wasn't working. Yeah, actually, one thing that I noticed that was really impressive was that the United Arab Emirates actually had a very ambitious NDC referring to coral reefs. having to do with transplanting coral reefs, creating new ones, but also being able to rehabilitate and restore the ones that have already been, having issues with their health due to a number of ocean hazards and things like that. So I would recommend for anybody who really wants to see some ambitious coral reef commitments to look to United Arab Emirates NDC, which can be actually linked in the NDC guide or NDC tracker that is in the comments.
Great, thanks, Olivia. It's so helpful to have those concrete examples, I think, as more countries start taking on board these recommendations. Mario, this next one is a question for you. Some of the recommendations call for adequate financing to support research and technology transitions. So can you talk a bit about how you see these recommendations for ocean-based NDC enhancement aligning with the green stimulus discussions that are going on currently?
Thank you so much, Taryn. So I think we're in a unique situation to have these green stimulus packages being the vehicle in which other climate initiatives could be incorporated to be able to fulfill certain aspects of the Paris Agreement, and for us to be able to achieve various targets set out in NDCs. And I do think that although the green stimulus package can help drive or leverage some of the funding needed to be able to lead to technology transfer or to be able to implement some of these new technologies, I do think there needs to be proper coordination between ministries to be able to have that actually happen. There needs to be proper coordination between the finance ministries that are developing and dealing with the budgets as the stimulus packages gets developed and unfolded. And I think they need to coordinate fully with the ministries of environment to ensure that the right signals are sent and the right investments are directed to the necessary climate actions that could lead to strengthening an economy and building back better and achieving the necessary climate goals that we want to achieve as well. So I do think the stimulus package, yes, is a good opportunity for us to leverage the financing needed to roll out some of these initiatives mentioned in the guide.
Excellent, thanks. I'm sure that is a point that is on a lot of governments' agenda right now as they try to jointly tackle the many challenges that are currently facing us. The next question is asking about what we can learn from other sectors about integrating solutions into the NDCs. So whether there are lessons from other sectors, agriculture and energy, for example, that have integrated solutions into NDCs or other national plans, and what can the ocean sector learn from those experiences? I'll take the first cut at this, and then I'll invite others to weigh in if you'd like. I think we have seen advocates who are focused on many other sectors really seeing the NDCs as a valuable instrument to advance their priorities. I think for some of the reasons that that were mentioned in the first presentation, and sometimes those recommendations are welcomed and integrated. Sometimes there can be some pushback from government, and maybe I'll mention a couple of the specific points of pushback that I have seen, so that those who might be advocating similar approaches in oceans can be prepared to address those. I think one initial point is to be clear about why you want this solution to be integrated into the NDC specifically. And this speaks to the point that I made earlier about economy-wide targets, and some people seeing those targets as sort of all-encompassing and perhaps not seeing the NDC as an instrument to get into a lot of detail about how they will be implemented. I think there are strong counter arguments to that point, including about the role of NDCs in sending very concrete signals to certain sectors, in helping to channel finance and things like that. But I would recommend that advocates be very clear about what the specific rationale is for the value add of the NDC specifically. And then a second point of pushback has to do with data and analysis. And particularly where countries might be looking to integrate those kinds of solutions into an economy-wide target, often they're using modeling studies to sort of understand what the broader economic impact would be of integrating a certain sector or approach into their NDC, or what the greenhouse gas impact would be of that approach. And in order to feel comfortable doing that, and including that in their models, they need a certain degree of data and just certainty about how this will actually work and what the impact will be. And I think we see this as a particular challenge in some ocean-related solutions, for example, surrounding blue carbon, where the data picture is kind of still catching up. It's not quite where it is. I think there are a lot of good efforts underway, but it's still kind of a top agenda item. And that can pose some concerns for some countries, depending on how they're approaching NDCs. And I think there, I think my response would be that including that action into an economy-wide target is not the only meaningful way to include it in an NDC. You can set sectoral targets. You can set targets framed in non-GHG terms. And we have many, many examples of that from other sectors and how that can work. So I think that's another sort of nuance to appreciate as folks are looking to how to do this, and a lesson that we can draw from other sectors. Mario or Olivia, did you want to come in on that question or any other last words before we hand it over? Okay, if not, we do have one last question that I'm just seeing. The question is there an ocean solution advisory team to help countries find the best solutions for their NDC? Can either of you speak to resources along those lines that can help countries at this ocean climate nexus? Whether it's an advisory team or other processes.
I guess I would just come out and say I'm not sure if there is an advisory team. I think that would be really great because I feel like coordination is really important, especially like on an international level. Because I think that that's the way that we could make the most progress in the shortest amount of time. So I guess I would support that idea.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Thank you, Olivia. And I think these resources that we've shared in the chat are very much intended as an impetus to get these kinds of ideas flowing. And perhaps our hosts will have other information about ongoing efforts as well. So I certainly invite them to weigh in. And with that, I think our time is up. Thank you so much for joining our discussion. And I will hand it over to Thomas now to transition us to the next session. Thank you.
Thank you, Taryn, and thank you to Mario, Olivia, and yourself for those really informative presentations. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon to everybody. My name is Tom Hickey. I work for the Pew Charitable Trusts, and I'm very pleased to be able to introduce a jam-packed lineup of speakers for the first of today's panels focused on maximising nature-based solutions. Throughout yesterday's discussions, I think it was clear across the highest levels of government that there exists a wealth of ambitions to take forward ocean-based solutions, many of which relate to different forms of marine protections. So in this first panel session of the day, we dive a little deeper into the kind of work and partnerships that are involved in helping translate some of those aspirations into action. We have a brilliant lineup of speakers spanning a range of expertise, as well as a fantastic set of moderators. Lorelei Picor from the Ocean and Climate Platform, and Tamara Thomas of Conservation International, both experts in their own field, as well as collectively being the joint chairs of the Global Climate Ambition Alliance's work programme on oceans. It promises to be a really insightful discussion. Lorelei, Tamara, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Tom, and welcome everyone. So today, before we start, we'd just like to really give thanks to the Pew Charitable Trust, NRDC, IUCN, and the Ocean and Climate Platform, along with Conservation International, for co-organizing this particular session. We know that maximizing nature-based solutions, the ocean is the ocean. The ocean plays a central role in regulating the climate system, as well as in providing life support to all species on Earth. Blue carbon, mangroves, seagrasses, and salt marshes, and open ocean ecosystems, including through photosynthesis, are capable of storing a large amount of carbon. This ability to sequester carbon contributes to mitigating climate change. However, these ecosystems are greatly threatened by anthropogenic pressures and must therefore be protected to maintain their function in the carbon cycle. Building on the Ocean and Climate Subster Dialogue and the Ocean Climate Ambition Summit, we intend to further define the next steps and priorities for ocean climate issues, paving the way for COP26. This includes finding and promoting ways to effectively protect coastal and marine ecosystems and their function in the carbon cycle. This session will focus on three main themes: coastal blue carbon ecosystems, building resilience on other ocean ecosystems, as well as climate smart MPAs. And we'll start this session with a video from some work that's being done on the ground in Colombia.
The rich coastal ecosystems of mangroves, seagrasses, and salt marshes are critically important in the fight against climate change. These blue carbon ecosystems remove carbon from the atmosphere and ocean and lock it away in the plants and sediments below them for hundreds and even thousands of years. However, if degraded, these ecosystems release that carbon, contributing to climate change. Coastal blue carbon ecosystems are found on every continent except Antarctica. They provide habitat for a rich diversity of species, support critical fisheries, and provide protection for millions of people from storms and coastal flooding. In 2015, the Paris Climate Agreement recognised that blue carbon ecosystems have an important role in addressing climate change. Countries are now beginning to include coastal wetlands in their commitments to achieving this critical global goal. At the same time, coastal communities are acting to protect and restore mangroves, seagrasses, and salt marshes.
Cuando iniciamos el proyecto en Colombia en el 2015, en una pequeña bahía de la costa caribe llamada Cispatá, pocas personas entendían el significado de carbono azul.
En Colombia le apostamos al futuro. Por eso, desde el Ministerio de Ambiente lideramos diferentes proyectos para ser más resilientes a los cambios que nos plantea el clima. El gobierno del presidente Iván Duque le apuesta a la carbono-neutralidad, priorizando el bienestar humano y garantizando que los diferentes sectores y territorios cuenten con las capacidades necesarias para adaptarse al cambio climático.
Con el propósito de avanzar en ese futuro que queremos los colombianos y el mundo entero, entidades públicas y privadas y comunitarias se han unido en consolidar el proyecto de carbono azul Vida Manglar, que busca reducir las emisiones de CO2 a través de la conservación y el uso sostenible de los manglares del Golfo Morrosquillo.
La región de Cispatá es una de las regiones más ricas en términos de biodiversidad del Caribe colombiano. Conserva los manglares mejor desarrollados de toda la cuenca y es el punto de encuentro de una altísima biodiversidad representada en peces, aves, una riqueza única. Se encuentra amenazada por distintas actividades que tienen que ver con la agricultura, la ganadería, el desarrollo urbano, más recientemente con las actividades portuarias o el turismo.
El proyecto de carbono azul
podría contribuir enormemente, no solamente en la sostenibilidad de este importante ecosistema de manglar, sino en el medio de vida de los pobladores que ahí habitan. Esto es muy importante porque nos podría garantizar un flujo de recursos que podría cofinanciar las mismas actividades de conservación del manglar y podría ser un interesante modelo donde se conjuga la adaptación de cambio climático con unas soluciones basadas en naturaleza.
Hicimos un acuerdo de conservación del manglar para tener un ecosistema sano, así tener más peces, más aves y más que presentarle al turismo.
Desde el gobierno nacional queremos que esta iniciativa de carbono azul sea replicada en otros sitios del Caribe y el Pacífico colombiano, y desde ya estamos trabajando para lograrlo.
Orlando and his community know that their mangroves are critical for their well-being now and into the future. Blue Carbon brings them new reasons and tools for conserving and restoring this critical ecosystem. The government of Colombia understands the importance of mangroves for the community and for the whole country. Colombia has also made mangroves an important part of its commitments to achieving the Paris Climate Agreement and to solving climate change for us all.
Well, wonderful. This video was a great way to set the scene for this panel discussion. I believe I have recognized as well the voice of Emily Pigeon, our very own in-house David Attenborough. So now let's welcome our beautiful panel for this session. We have Nadia Boud, Maria Claudia Diaz-Granados, Torsten Thiel, Julio Cardano, and Sophie Mirgo. We will introduce you as you will take the floor, and now we can dive right in. So if that's okay with you, I will start with Nadia Boud. Nadia, you are the Senior Program Officer responsible for marine science and climate change for the World Wildlife Fund's Mesoamerica Program Office. You are also the head of the WWF's field office in Belize. Welcome, Nadia. Thank you for being here with us. When it comes to blue carbon, Belize has actually built part of its ambition around enhancing coastal wetlands protection in its NDC. That is pretty ambitious. So can you tell us a bit more about this, please? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Lorelei. Well, coastal wetlands often referred to as blue carbon ecosystems, can play an important role in meeting the goals of the Paris Agreement as a nature-based solution. Coastal wetlands can provide measurable contribution towards countries' mitigation and adaptation commitments, and thus need critical actions for their protection, locally, nationally, and globally. Belize, as a vulnerable small island developing state, is increasingly recognizing the immense importance of conserving and restoring its coastal wetlands, and is aiming to use its NDC process to increase ambition to protect them. Belize submitted its first national determined contribution in 2015, and will be submitting an updated version of these commitments for inclusion in the global stocktake plan in conjunction with COP26. Belize is enhancing its coastal wetlands target within the revised NDC, recognizing the importance of the role they play for adaptation and mitigation. To support this effort, WWF and PU are working alongside the government and partners to generate data, build capacity, and uncover financing solutions to fund nature-based on-the-ground actions. In the coming months, blue carbon scientists working alongside Belize government officials and University of Belize students will begin to collect soil carbon data beneath our mangroves and seagrass beds to bring more specificity to the long understood potential of these natural carbon sinks. Of course, beyond gathering the data to quantify the amount of carbon stored below Belize's mangroves and seagrass,
The project will also build capacity by providing in-person training for greenhouse gas inventory, reporting, and best practices for MRV, measuring, reporting, and verification, in order to continue to report those values in the future using applicable methodologies. Financing strategies are a central component of this work. Thus, by mid-2021, Belize will have a comprehensive costing of blue carbon activities within the NDC and a selection of bankable projects that can then be taken forward to funders as ready-to-fund projects. From an institutional perspective, the Belize government is working with the NDC partnership and Vivid Economics via a technical working group, of which WWF and Pew are members. And we're doing this to carry out its NDC updating. To support this process, a multi-sectoral blue carbon working group have been created with the goal of providing guidance in the setting of ambitious quantitative and qualitative targets to safeguard the ecosystem service values of coastal wetlands. The Blue Carbon Working Group includes representation from government, NGOs, academia, civil society, and community groups, and is convened on a bi-monthly basis or as the need arises. The recommended activities and targets being laid out within the revised NDC will be implemented through varied national and sectoral policies and plans, including the country's Integrated Coastal Zone Management Plan and its National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan. Opportunities will also be sought for inclusion within the proposed strategic plan for Belize's new Blue Economy Ministry. With the integrative and participative and scientific-based approach of Belize is taking to enhance opportunities for ocean-based climate actions within its NDC, the country is positioning itself as a leader in climate-smart ocean management and ambition building. The approach taken can certainly be a case study for sharing with other countries, particularly those in the region with similar conditions.
Thank you very much, Nadia. This was wonderful, and we very much look forward to seeing Belize's renewed NDC. So now if we move a little bit south of Belize down to Colombia, we'll meet with Maria Claudia Diaz Granados. Maria Claudia, you are Blue Carbon Director at Conservation International. And as we all know, CI has been leading some groundwork in blue carbon for many years. And in Colombia, you have a project that is called Vida Manglar, which is the first blue carbon project in Colombia and worldwide using the VER wetland module methodology. So that sounds fascinating. So can you please tell us a little bit more, Maria?
Yes, thank you, Lorelei, for inviting us to share with you all the results of our project. And you already saw as a short video. Unfortunately, there were some parts of the video that stopped during the presentation. But basically, our project is a local, interinstitutional, and regional community initiatives that seeks certification of actions related with the reduction of carbon emission due to unplanned deforestation and the conservation of coastal wetlands in about 70,000 hectares of mangrove forest present in an area southern in the Caribbean coast of Colombia called Morrosquillo Gulf. The project is a very good example of a public-private alliance addressing nature-based solution and natural capital conservation, where CI Colombia is the project proponent. However, there are other entities involved in the project that are part of the governance structure with key activities and responsibilities. For example, the National Marine and Coastal Research Institute. Are you hearing me correctly? Yeah, good.
Yes, please.
So the National Marine Research Institute in VEMAR, there are 2 regional environmental authorities. There is also a national NGO called Fundación Omacha, and local community associations are also key components of the structure. And more recently, we also partner with Apple. The main aim of this project is the reduction of GHG emissions through the activities that allow the identification, prioritization, and execution of actions for the management of the mangroves, as well as the promotion of sustainable development, the strengthening of a local governance structure, and the promotion of innovative productive activities to reduce and minimize threats to the environment, as you saw in the video. And at the same time, we aim at contributing to the protection of high values of community conservation and biodiversity. The mitigation project began in 2015, and it goes to 2045. It means that it's a 30-year project. And during that period, we expect to reduce a little bit less than 1 million tons of CO2 equivalent, and co-benefits for 3 endangered species and local communities, of course. According to the national resolution, the project is already registered under the national system or national database, and hence the generation of non-compatible overlaps with future programs or projects in the same area are avoided. And in this way, it's also eliminated the possibility of double counting in the same area.
Thank you very much, Maria Claudia. This was very clear. I know that you mentioned public-private partnership with Apple as well, so I will get back to you with that in a little bit. But as you have mentioned, Blue Carbon really is a very good example of addressing ocean climate issues with an integrated approach. And of course, in that regard, the private sector, as we have heard also yesterday, has been increasingly looking at ways to develop innovative approaches which take into account nature-based solutions and natural capital. So now we have the chance to have an eminent ocean governance and sustainable finance expert here with us. So I will turn to Torsten Thiel. Torsten, you're also the founder of the Global Ocean Trust, and you have been one of the earlier members of the Ocean and Climate Platform. So we've had the pleasure of working together in the past. Welcome, Torsten. Thank you for being here. And can you share with us your views on integrating blue natural capital and blue finance in the global blue carbon approach, please?
Thank you very much, Lorelei. Yes, it's a critical importance that the protection and restoration of these blue carbon ecosystems is based on a solid flow of projects and a clear investment narrative. The concept of blue natural capital places blue carbon into such an emerging new asset class that has multiple benefits that can be taken into account in the financial structuring of these projects. And they arise obviously from the carbon mitigation component, but also from adaptation value, resilience, and biodiversity protection, and protecting and delivering opportunities for local livelihoods. If you bring all this together, you can look to multiple potential revenue streams and help to de-risk the needed investment. And it's this upfront investment that we're trying to encourage with these approaches. And so it becomes a key part of this new taxonomy of sustainability finance, and bringing it in that way is a way to actually deliver funding for these projects. With the IUCN Blue Natural Capital Finance Facility, we had the opportunity to have an important test bed for this approach. It allows the integration of nature-based solutions comprehensively into projects. And so the resulting outcome is what I term blue infrastructure. It's really a way of saying that bringing in these nature-based components into larger infrastructure type projects, we end up with better projects. They're more resilient, they're more adaptive, and also therefore financially more sound. And so that blue carbon embedding of these blue carbon solutions in these much larger funding flows makes them investable also for traditional private sector funds. So in sum, the creation of blue finance as a subset, as a key part of climate finance, brings funding into these crucial blue carbon ecosystems. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Torsten. This was very enlightening as usual. Public-private collaborations are blooming on all sides to implement nature-based solutions and better protect and sustainably manage marine ecosystems. And as I promised Maria Claudia, I said that I would get back to you with public-private partnerships, because I believe that Apple has partnered with Conservation International to help you develop a new approach to valuing the full carbon potential of this rich marine ecosystems. You briefly mentioned it, but could you tell us a bit more about this model and how it can be scaled up? The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Lorelei. In fact, the partnership with Apple has been key for the project, helping to develop this new approach to valuing the full carbon potential of these rich marine ecosystems, from treetops down to into the soil. And this is also helping us providing a model for other blue carbon initiatives in Colombia, but also around the world. I believe that Apple funding, it's been and can be also scaled up, because they, first of all, support an innovative approach for the voluntary carbon market. It also supported demonstration that has obviously the ability to scale. Through CI, it catalyzed the strategy that we developed in Colombia for carbon mitigation and nature climate solutions. And with this project, we became a model at national scales. And also one of the key issues that we receive from Apple, is the communication opportunities for blue carbon solutions and blue carbon projects. Because through the Apple Newsroom feature and Fortune and other communications tools, we were able to share the project worldwide. And it also had a very important aspect, or very important opportunity at national scale. So I think this public-private partnership has been key. It's been also an example, and I am pretty sure that can be replicated everywhere.
Thank you very much for your leadership, and that echoes well with the message of Nigel Topping yesterday, our climate champion from the UK, who said that we need to embark on a race to resilience and a race to zero emissions, and of course the private sector needs to be associated with that effort. So now we will go back to Nadia as an advocate for having a multi-sectoral and financing strategy for blue carbon ecosystems. Can you develop a little bit on which specific sectors you would mobilize as a priority, and also make the link with how these public-private partnerships can further provide socioeconomic benefits at the local level?
Thank you, Lorelei. As a first step, and as it relates to Belize, a blue carbon working group, as I mentioned before, was created to provide data and guidance. Data, as you know, is very key to inform decisions. The Blue Carbon Working Group provides technical and scientific inputs and guidance, including assisting with the identification, integration and implementation of mitigation and adaptation measures to include within policies, strategies, and regulatory instruments. Members are drawn from a range of expertise, including climate change, environmental management, coastal and marine monitoring and planning, coastal carbon science and assessment, remote sensing, international climate change policy, policy dialogue, and stakeholder engagement. As well, decisions are convened with representatives from multiple sectors, including NGOs, permitting agencies, academia, private sector, and as it relates to private sector, this include members from the tourism, fisheries, and agriculture sectors across those that exist within the coast or have a stake in the coast, of course. Also from community groups and funding institutions. We feel that gathering inputs from such a wide range of stakeholders allows for a participative and transparent process that collects, integrate, and aim to prioritize the concerns of all groups that have a stake within the coastal zone, as well to ensure that the voices of vulnerable groups, those at the local level, are elevated. Our engagement with funding institutions is very key because this helps to ensure that the funding is directed where critically needed.
Great, thank you so much, Nadia, and thank you, Maria Claudia and Torsten as well for bringing such clarity, not only on how some countries are leading the way and have concretely managed to include blue carbon in their national strategies or upcoming revised NDCs, but also on highlighting the role of the private and financial sectors in scaling up action. But as you know, this session is not just about blue carbon, although they have secured a lot of interest from countries and non-state actors. So now we will explore some other nature-based solutions, and in that regard, I will now turn to Julio Cardano. Julio, you are Director of Environmental Affairs, as well as the climate lead negotiator for Chile's Ministry of External Affairs. So you're an extremely busy man. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today. As we all know, Chile is one of the great ocean climate champions. And you personally, Julio, have done so much to advance the ocean climate issue under the UNFCCC. So as one of the founding members of the Because the Ocean Initiative, and you have led in the last few years the global discussions on including ocean-related measures into NDCs. And now that Chile has submitted its NDC, we can truly say that you have walked the talk. So we can, as your minister proudly said yesterday. So please, Julio, can you tell us a bit more about all of that work and the ocean components in the Chile NDC? The floor is yours.
Sure, thank you very much, Lorelei, and thank you for that generous introduction of what we have tried to do in our contribution to this debate. And I think it's great to have such an array of views and contributions and people coming into the conversation. As you know, we've been in this topic for a few years, and we are very encouraged, really, of seeing so many people coming into the discussion from the different walks of life, and such a vibrant debate that we're having. So it's really great to be here. So I just wanted to share some initial thoughts on the question. I think the most important element that inspires our approach to including the ocean in our NDC is how can we integrate different dimensions of the protection of the ocean, both from the point of view of integrating mitigation and adaptation as a result of the implementation of conservation policies. And at the same time, how the different aspects of the protection of the ocean, that some of them are very closely related to climate change, but maybe other aspects are less related to climate change, like pollution or fisheries management and other topics that are relevant also to the conservation of the ocean. So how can we integrate all those things into and make it coherent and consistent with our climate policies? And the main instrument that we have been developing in Chile is a network of marine protected areas that, as you may know, Chile has been very active in creating those marine protected areas. And in fact, we have 41 marine protected areas that cover 43% of our jurisdictional waters. So that is an extremely important tool that we have in Chile. And it was just an obvious or a natural step, really, to use the implementation of those marine protected areas in our NDC as an integration tool to make sure that we are monitoring and measuring and maximizing the co-benefits of climate change, of the combat climate change, as we implement those marine protected areas, both for mitigation and for adaptation. And our NDC clearly indicates this, that by implementing those MPAs, we will address issues like like carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere, increasing storms and other extreme weather events, reduction of ocean productivity, environmental degradation, changes in distribution of species, and other topics like acidification and deoxygenation of the ocean. So with that in mind, we try to define what would be an ambitious objective and goal in our NDC. And I think Olivia from WRI has already stolen my storm in a way, stolen my thunder in a way, because she already mentioned some of this, but I'm very happy to see that the WRI is also closely following the work that we're doing. So the NDC basically says that that all of the marine protected areas that I just mentioned will have management plans and administration plans, and will include actions for adaptation and mitigation of greenhouse gases, and that we will also have a new marine protected areas that are representative of our ecoregions, and so that's basically the approach that we have followed. And of course, now the great challenge that we have now is how to precisely to bring this project and this plan to concrete terms. And so this is why we're now discussing about implementation strategies for our MPAs. And this is, I think this is why the conversation that I was just hearing is so important, because I think one of the critical issues that we have identified is precisely how we can involve local communities, try to identify opportunities for public and private partnerships and funding, and through those creative and innovative approaches, be successful in the ambition that we have set for ourselves. So I think I will leave it there for the moment, but that's our main approach.
Thank you so much, Julio. That was excellent. And we're so happy that you joined our panel today. So now we know that there are two sides to the ocean story. There's ocean mitigation and ocean adaptation, both feeding into resilience. So now I will focus on Sophie. Sophie, you are from Belgium and also the Special Envoy for the Ocean, and extremely familiar with multilateral environmental agreements, and are currently, sorry, I just realized my camera was off, and are currently advocating for ocean protection, not only on the high seas, borders beyond national jurisdiction front, but also on the convention and biodiversity level. We know that there are many synergies that occur among all of these conventions. 2021 is meant to be the delayed super year for biodiversity, and MPAs, together with the 30 by 30 challenge, will be at the heart of the negotiations for the post-2020 framework for biodiversity. Can you tell us more about the role of Belgium in the Blue Leaders Coalition and how you will advocate for our ocean in 2021?
Thank you. Let me start with an apology. I completely lost my voice, so let's hope that this will work. So this is actually funny because it's the one time I get a time slot that allows me to give a presentation without being interrupted by my children, and now I don't have a voice. My son looked at me actually earlier today and he said, "You cannot give a presentation like that." But okay, let's try. So I remember that I gave a presentation, a talk, when I was at the COP in Madrid in December 2019. And I actually called 2020 the year of the ocean. Of course, I didn't know by then that it turns out we will actually need 2 years of the ocean, which is fine. We love the ocean. We can dedicate 2 years to it. So 2020 had to deal with completely changed circumstances. And 2021 is the year actually where we need to take a number of key files to the finish line. So this year, the international community will decide on new ocean conservation targets at the CBD COP in Kunming, and on a new treaty for conservation and management of marine biodiversity in the high seas, that area of the ocean beyond national jurisdiction that constitutes about 2/3 actually of our global ocean. And one could actually argue that a lot of the international multilateral processes have been delayed and have been slowed down by the pandemic. And this is true, but it has also actually opened our eyes to the fact that it's more important than ever to have healthy and resilient ecosystems and healthy and resilient oceans, and our planet as such needs to be healthy. Belgian Minister Van Quickenborne, who spoke yesterday, said that Belgium believes that we actually need to seize these opportunities to achieve ambitious outcomes. And now is the time to do so more than ever. And so to that end, Belgium has convened a group of ministers and heads of states that is known as Blue Leaders. And it's a growing group actually that is committed to delivering these ambitious outcomes. The Blue Leaders, which include, for example, Nigeria, Costa Rica, Sweden, Spain, Finland, Denmark, and a number of other ones, along with Belgium, are advocating for a strong new international goal, protecting 30% of the ocean by 2030, like a number of other alliances, through a network of fully and highly protected MPAs. And the rapid adoption of a robust new high seas treaty. Both of these processes actually need each other in order to realize the 30%, in order to actually be able to have 30% of marine protected areas. We also need, both from a biological, but also from a political point of view, we need to be able to create MPAs that are also outside national jurisdictions. So like we heard Chile just say that they protected 43%, Belgium protected 37%, but of course this is within national jurisdiction. So you need the outside national jurisdiction in order to achieve 30% on a global level. And so in order to have that, we need that BBNJ agreement, that high seas agreement to be adopted, which can, it entails a procedure for the adoption of marine protected areas. And on the other hand, having an ambitious 30% goal will be an incentive for the BBNJ agreement once it will kick off to start its work expeditiously and enthusiastically, knowing that we are actually a united team of delegations of countries who are pushing for this very same target. So that's how we see the Blue Leaders. Apologies again for sounding like this. I hope the message didn't get lost.
No, I think your message is going to be ingrained in everyone's head right now. So thank you so much. I do have a follow-up question for you, Sophie, because what you said is very interesting. So we know that, as you just mentioned, there's growing support on many fronts for a new international target to protect at least 30% of the ocean through a global network of marine protected areas, as you mentioned, known as 30 by 30. Of course, this issue will be addressed at the CBD COP, so the Convention on Biological Diversity COP. But since there is growing momentum to build synergies between the UNFCCC and other international regimes, can you tell us a little more about MPAs as a tool that can possibly enhance the ocean's resilience against the impacts of climate change?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that question. I think actually a healthy ocean is simply better equipped to take on the consequences of climate change than one that is already sick. And so, I mean, especially I can say this today that if I would have been healthier, I would have been more well equipped to tackle your question. So apart from actually reversing climate change, which is of course something that we are going to do or are trying to do, are setting our minds at doing and taking action for, marine protected areas are actually the tool before any other to cure the ocean, to actually give it a fair fighting chance against the effects of climate change. We want to give, with the creation of large-scale marine protected areas, and especially highly fully protected marine protected areas, we want to give the ocean some breathing room, actually. MPAs simply mean less pressure on the ocean. And if we do it at the right places, taking into account science which actually indicates that 30% minimum is the figure that we need to aim for, then we can put less pressure on the ocean and make it stronger to both function as a climate regulator, which it does, and also to resist the negative impacts of climate change. And so these two goals of agreeing both on this 30 by 30 target and getting the BBNJ agreement are in a sense too ambitious, but also realistic goals that will significantly bolster the ocean's resilience against the impacts of climate change. And it will allow the ocean to continue to play its part that we needed to play for the fight against climate change. But not only that, but also food security for billions of people who rely on food coming from the ocean, on fish, on other types of food for their livelihoods. But also to provide safe havens for endangered ocean life, such as whales, seabirds, sharks, turtles, etc. So actually, if I can end on this note, we would like to invite all governments participating here today, participating yesterday, that are not yet Blue Leaders to actually join us. And we have actually changed from live events, which is what we did before, to online posts. We have a number of videos from our partners, from our ministers who have actually already become Blue Leaders, and they are on our Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook pages. And you can also go to our official government website, www.blueleaders.be, to find more information. And please don't hesitate to contact me if you want more information. In writing, it will probably be easier these days than live.
Thank you so much, Sophie. You did a really, really good job, even with not being very well. So thank you so much. Excellent. So we hear growing momentum to break down the silos and build synergies across governance frameworks. This was actually one of the central themes of the Subster Ocean Climate Dialogue last December. So to do so, we of course need to work across sectors as well. And again, here, finance is an essential component. We heard at the One Planet Summit earlier this month that France, for example, wanted to commit 30% of climate finance to protecting biodiversity. So going back to Torsten, in your opinion, how can we better address finance issues with regards to the ocean climate nexus at the UNFCCC level and across the different conventions?
Thank you very much, Tamara. I think what we need is an ocean climate financial architecture that engages everyone, so that public and private sector, local communities and international investors can help to deliver these ocean climate solutions rapidly and at scale, so that the emerging sustainable blue economy delivers these climate, ocean, and biodiversity benefits. Now, to build this financial architecture, we need to start with what we already have. We have the Green Climate Fund, we have the GEF, but we also have this important role of the existing multilateral, multinational financial institution and development banks, but also private sector impact funds and other related private sector efforts. Now, these existing climate and biodiversity finance efforts need to be reinforced, and new international instruments such as the BBNJ need to be linked in the appropriate way so that they have access to the necessary finance to deliver at scale. But this is in itself not enough, because not only do we need to scale up the amounts, but we need to bring in innovative financial solutions so that we can overcome bottlenecks. Bottlenecks are in access at the local needs level. They are in terms of products that are accessible to investors, and they are in terms of knowledge. We need places that are hubs of ocean climate finance knowledge, and I've talked about an Ocean Sustainability Bank or other ways to build new partnerships. So additionally, these larger ecosystem scales that we want to address and building the capacity around it is not only important for nature and people, but it also makes actually financing more valuable. So the new Blue-Green Deal is a way to build forward better around these various processes so that they are all integrated with an architecture behind it that can support rapid delivery. Thank you, Tamara.
Thank you very much, Torsten, for that explanation, and a very quick one as well. So excellent. We are running a little short on time, so I'll turn back to Julio now. So Julio, this may be the last question of the panel. We have heard some interesting ideas to raise the status of the ocean on the political agenda. Chile held the COP25 presidency and did a tremendous job at getting the ocean in the final decision. So now we would like to ask you, what do you wish for the ocean climate nexus at COP26 and moving forward and beyond COP26?
Thank you, Tamara. That's a very, very important question, and of course it's really in our minds as we speak, as we are preparing for COP26, and the natural obvious steps after the dialogue, after the ocean dialogue that was mandated in COP25, is of course we need to wait for the report of the SABSTA chair that will put together the main ideas and potential suggestions that they can be identified from the dialogue. But also, I think that is an input that is very important and critical. But at the same time, I think throughout this discussion, we have been a number of other processes have been mentioned that are also very important, like BBNJ. There is a critical a process to define how to create MPAs in the high seas, which is at the same time critical for achieving the 30 by 30 objective to be negotiated in the CBD COP later in the year in China. And there are, of course, many platforms that are trying to push for this agenda. So what I'm trying to say is that we are facing a complex architecture, just to steal the word from the last presentation. We have a complex architecture of processes that are pointing in similar directions. And we need to make sure that we have consistency across all of those processes. Of course, for COP26, we need to have a continuation of the efforts. We need to make sure that COP26 also presents, goes up in one level of our efforts. And we need to debate on what is that level up. This is why, yesterday our Minister of Foreign Affairs was proposing to have some sort of a document, maybe in the form of a declaration, because the Ocean Declaration number 3, as you may remember, we have already done 2 declarations under the title Because the Ocean, and that document should sort of plot the way ahead in terms of what are the objectives that we need to have. And I think at least 3 things really pop in our minds. One is how can we connect the ocean to the ambitious cycle of the UNFCCC, and specifically to prepare prepare the way towards the global stocktake in 2023, so the ocean can have a significant role in the global stocktake. The second one is the funding strategy. How as been said by many in this debate, how can we identify the best sources of funding for this enormous task that we have in protecting the ocean? And the third one, of course, is how can we identify concrete steps in COP26 that push this agenda forward? And I really like this idea of having a sort of a task force of solutions for the ocean that can guide parties and non-state actors to identify good, effective solutions. We have suggested a task force formally in our submissions that can be maybe bring different people from constituted bodies under the UNFCCC like from the finance, from the Standing Committee on Finance, from other constituted bodies, to form a task force around the ocean issue. But I think we can also learn from previous examples from the UNFCCC process, like the CTCN or the local community and indigenous peoples platform, that include in their governance observers and experts that can bring their knowledge and their experience to guide that task force that could be identified under the UNFCCC. So the task is enormous. It's great, but at the same time, it's very exciting, and I think we are in a good position. I can say that I think the appointment of the new special envoy for climate change in the US is a very good news. It's a very good piece of news for this cause, and I think Glasgow will also be a blue COP. So we really hope that those efforts will deliver concrete results. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Julio, and thank you, you and your country, for your great leadership. We did have a question that was arising through the chat, but I think you responded to it in your closing remarks. It was basically around how can we make sure the ocean continues to be a priority under the UNFCCC, but you very well answered that question, so I will not ask it. And we are running out of time, so I'm going to move along quickly. Just to wrap up today's session, we've heard about nature-based solutions, including protecting and restoring marine and coastal ecosystems that are cost-effective, etc. And we've also talked a little bit about the synergies across conventions. We've spoken about finance and also resiliency. So thank you everyone who joined the panel, and I'll turn it over to Lorelei and then two more folks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tamara, and thank you so much to all our panelists. A big virtual round of applause for all our speakers today. Thank you for your dedication, for your passion, and for your leadership. It was great to see so many friendly faces, and I truly hope that in the coming months we'll get to see each other in real life. In the meantime, we'll continue our collective work for a healthy ocean and a protected climate. So now I will hand it over to Tom for closing this session with our special guest for closing remarks. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lorelei, and thank you to yourself and Tamara, and indeed to all those panelists. Those fantastic lineup of speakers. I think a common theme across both days of discussion has been the importance of partnerships, and evidently there's a wealth of experience and willingness out there to help to continue translating some of this ambition into concrete action. So we conclude this panel with remarks from Costa Rican Vice Minister for Oceans and Water, Aide Rodriguez. I suspect very few of us are not familiar with Costa Rica's environmental credentials, including their recently updated nationally determined contribution, which includes, amongst a range of ocean measures, some of the most ambitious and specific commitments of any NDC to the protection of their blue carbon ecosystems. Vice Minister, a very warm welcome. You have the floor.
Muy buenas tardes. 2020 left us with many challenges and many lessons learned. Mainly that the climate change and biodiversity loss crisis are deeply connected and must be addressed in a coordinated manner if we are to survive. Scientists have been telling us about this for many, many years, as is demonstrated by several reports like the IPCC. But the emergency of the COVID-19 pandemic brought us these topics to the forefront of political action. The health emergency revealed just how deep our vulnerabilities are, how we depend on a clean and a healthy environment to be safe, and underscored the urgency to build more resilient societies, ones that are ready to act in a coordinated manner to tackle climate change and biodiversity loss, not just to prevent future pandemics, but to ensure the sustainability of all life in our planet. For Costa Rica, including the role of the ocean in the global climate change and biodiversity discussion is essential. The ocean is the largest ecosystem of the planet and the largest carbon sink. It cannot be so ignored any longer, nor treated as a free-for-all, never-ending repository of our waste. As you know, the sea accounts for 92% of Costa Rica's territory. We take our responsibility to the conservation and sustainable use of marine resources very seriously, and we understand that mainly and maintain healthy mangroves, coral reefs, and ocean floors are crucial for fish stocks, and in turn, marine life is also a special stakeholder in the regulation of ocean temperature. We are also aware of overfishing, and we are looking for some responses, immediate responses, to end this business. Within a humble patch of our planet, Costa Rica holds 6% of the world's biodiversity, which gives us an immense responsibility, not only without our citizens, but with all societies at large. Present and future generations of living beings are counting on us to build stronger paths to conserve and sustainable use our natural resources. My country has proven that a nature-minded pathway is not only environmentally responsible, but also economically sound. A recent report showed that protected areas and national parks have provided financial benefits of over $1.9 billion in 2019 alone. This represents 3.23% of Costa Rica's GDP. And of course, a huge share of our income comes from ecotourism, which is highly dependent on clean ocean and rich forests. Healthy and resilient oceans are essential for our survival. Our societies, particularly coastal communities, depend on them for food security and social, cultural and economic development. We are a small, but a very, very ambitious country. We understand that we need to add to the collective ambition of the international community to achieve the Paris Agreement goals and to have a robust post-2020 biodiversity framework. In this spirit of global cooperation, Costa Rica is leading with France and the United Kingdom, the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People, a coalition of more than 50 countries committed to achieving the protection of 30% of our world's land and marine ecosystems by 2030. Protecting 30% of the planet will improve the quality of life and well-being of our communities and help us achieve a fair and adaptive society, laying the foundation of the fulfillment of the 2030 agenda. Considering that we currently have protected only 7% of the world's ocean, this is an ambitious goal, but we strongly believe that it is achievable. Protecting 30% of the ocean will help us address both climate change and biodiversity loss. Climate models show that we are approaching a tipping point. If current trends in habitat conversion and emissions do not peak by 2030, then it will become impossible to remain below 1.5 degrees. On a national level, we have also committed to achieving the protection of 30% of our marine territory by 2030 and acknowledge that we also need to ensure proper maintenance of these conservation efforts. Therefore, I'm proud to announce that we have launched the Forever Blue Fund, which will ensure the financial sustainability and the long-term conservation of our marine biodiversity. Furthermore, Costa Rica believes that nature-based solutions are the best tools we have to restore our planet and to guarantee long-term sustainability well-being. We are also convinced that nature-based solutions have the potential to become the ideal link between the climate and biodiversity agendas, to create synergies between them and to optimize resources and results. We must start connecting the dots now. This is the time. We need to start tackling climate change and biodiversity loss as two sides of the same coin. The policies in the national commitments through NDCs and biodiversity programs should maximize synergies between climate and biodiversity and minimize the trade-offs. One way to go is to join forces and incorporate the language of nature-based solutions into the decisions of COP15 and COP26. So let's not forget that there are other important processes going on that will help us achieve the Paris Agreement goals and the post-2020 biodiversity framework. I'm talking here about the BBNJ agreement and the Code for Exploration and Exploitation of Minerals in the Seabed. Here, we need to be very ambitious and take action now. Our ocean beyond national jurisdictions and the deep sea cannot wait. As President Alvarado said during the launch of the High Ambition Coalition for People and Nature, now it is not the time to be scared, but to be brave and take bold action. We invite you to act, to put concrete commitments on the table, and to always look upon the ocean as our hope, an active stakeholder who deserves a seat at all international and domestic development tables. The ocean has supported our livelihood for millions of years. Let's not turn our backs on it, but rather embrace the ocean with action, kindness, and gratitude. This is the time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vice Minister, and apologies to those who had difficulties with the video there. That concludes our first panel. It leaves me only to hand over to Lisa and Tim for the second panel.
Thank you very much, Thomas. I hope everyone can hear me. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our distinguished panelists and participants. My name is Tim Fitzgerald, Senior Director of Ocean Climate Strategies for Environmental Defense Fund, and it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to our next session on coastal and community resilience. Before we get started, and as people are still logging in or switching over, we thought it would be helpful to get a better understanding of our participants today and their interests. So if you would please indicate your primary affiliation in the poll that you are about to see on screen, it will help us make this session even more relevant to the audience. Wonderful, thank you. Later on, I'll be joined by my co-moderator, Lisa Schindler-Murray from RARE. And before we get to our esteemed panel, I have a few housekeeping items to share for those who are just joining us. We'll aim for approximately 30 minutes of panelist remarks, followed by moderated and then audience questions and answers. You can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to direct a question to our panel. And if possible, indicate which panelist you'd like to answer. You can also upvote questions that you'd like to see answered. And finally, for simultaneous translation in Spanish or English, you can click on the globe icon at the bottom of your screen as well. So Few places do so many sustainable development goals come together as in oceans and coasts. In wild fisheries, an issue I work on, we know that climate change will cause the vast majority of wild stocks to shift their range, change their productivity, or both by the end of the century. Just think about that for a minute. Depending on the amount of warming that we see, most fisheries will shift across one or more political boundaries, and will likely see a change in the amount of fish available to people and ocean ecosystems. Given the food security, livelihood, and ocean health ramifications of these changes, we must begin making fisheries climate ready, and we must do it now. In today's discussion, we'll focus on a range of climate challenges that people face when they live near or make their living from the ocean. But rather than giving a laundry list of everything that's going wrong, which I apologize for sort of just doing, our panel today will focus on unique and innovative approaches that people and governments are taking to create resilience that improves food security, livelihoods, and ocean health. With that in mind, we'd ask you to complete just one more poll as we turn to our speakers and think ahead to the ensuing discussion. As you're filling that out, and in conclusion, I'd like to echo Secretary Kerry's comments from yesterday, that we can no longer afford to work on oceans and climate separately. Luckily, there seems to be real, tangible momentum behind this shift. At a global level, countries are becoming more ambitious in their NDCs, and on a more regional and local level, innovative resilience projects are getting harder and harder to count. That's where we hope to explore the remainder of the hour. And so without further ado, I am honored to introduce our esteemed panelists. First, we'll hear from Beverly Wade, Fisheries Administrator from Belize. Following Ms. Wade, we'll go to Kenia Vanessa Sierra, who's the Executive Director of the Commonwealth of Garifuna Municipalities of Honduras, who has over a decade of experience working with municipalities on development issues, supporting economic enterprise processes with community partners. She also trains municipalities in Honduras to build technical capacity through improved budgeting and other skills. Next, we'll go to Maria Claudia Diaz Granados, a marine biologist and ecologist with more than 20 years of experience in the research, management, and conservation of strategic aquatic and coastal ecosystems and species. At present, she is the Blue Carbon Director at Conservation International. And last, but certainly not least, Emily Corwin is the Director of Nature-Based Engineering Solutions at Conservation International, where she is creating the science, solutions, partnerships, and field examples needed to bring an innovative green-gray infrastructure approach to the world's most vulnerable communities. Ms. Wade, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tim. I'd first like to take this opportunity to thank the summit organizers for inviting Belize and my office to present on our experience in Belize and some of the innovations we have been implementing as it relates to building resiliency in the fisheries sector and also to achieve sustainable small-scale fisheries. So I'd like to start off first, just in next slide, please. Just in terms of context, Belize is a small coastal developing state where fisheries plays a critical role in our local economy. Local consumption contributes significantly to food security and livelihoods. To export, fisheries is in the top 4 foreign exchange earners for Belize, and the local tourism sector, which before COVID was our primary foreign exchange earner in Belize. So Belize's regime for sustainable small-scale fisheries and conservation actually began with the establishment of a network of protected areas, which is approximately 23% of our total territorial waters, and fishery and species-specific regulations for sustainable harvest, but realized that this wasn't sufficient. And in 2016, we established managed access which is a coast-to-coast spatially based system for the sustainable management of the most economically important export fisheries. This rights-based approach to fisheries in Belize have proven successful as a tool to empower traditional fishers, to protect their fishing areas, and to encourage increased stewardship and co-management of our protected areas and fisheries regime. We further realized that in an effort to strengthen this regime, there was a need for us to look at the multi-species finfish management, which added for local consumed species. Using new science tools specifically designed for coral reef ecosystems, new approaches for data-limited fisheries, and setting harvest controls on catch that will prevent and reverse overfishing to allow our fish stocks to become more resilient from climatic threats and to further secure the livelihoods of small-scale fishers. Next slide, please. So climate change adds yet another dimension. And there is evidence that climate change is affecting our marine resources. Next slide. We have seen unprecedented sea surface temperature rise in Belize. In fact, in 2019, we have experienced some of the highest temperatures that we have observed over the last couple of years in our waters. And this is now impacting our mariculture, our species availability. We're seeing unprecedented coral bleaching and disease, and that evidence that sea level rise will cause saline intrusions in our rivers. We've seen increased levels of sargassum that is affecting fauna along the coast, and we've seen increased ocean acidification that has resulted in more soft-shell lobsters, increased frequency and intensity of storms and hurricanes that have further damaged our corals and sensitive habitats. Next slide. Fishers and communities are just beginning to understand what is happening and are learning innovative ways to deal with climate change. And the Fisheries Department's climate change communication campaign from 2018 to 2020 contributed to improved knowledge, attitude, and practice on climate change and climate adaptation amongst fishers and communities. More work needs to be done with communities, as you can see from the graph, but it shows that fishers understand that the marine environment is changing and they cannot just rely on traditional knowledge, but seek to find new ways of adapting. Next slide. The Fisheries Department's investments approach to improve fishers and their households' capacity to adapt to climate change. In other words, one aspect of community resilience is to build adaptive capacity to respond to change. And the pillars of adaptive capacities are our governance systems, healthy ecosystems, economic flexibility, and social engagement. More importantly, we realize that there is the need to understand and remove barriers that restrict adaptive action, such as information, the social issues, cultural issues, and to look closely at how we can make more efficient and effective the government political context. Our understanding of adaptive capacity has led to exploring new opportunities for diversification like blue carbon, innovating multi-species fish basket management together with fishermen, and integrated coastal zone management. We believe that these components will make balancing fisheries with other uses more resilient and successful. Next slide. Financing adaptation and resiliency in the fisheries and coastal sector. Belize understands the centrality of food from the sea, both to meet global food security needs and to reduce GHG emissions. We know that aquatic foods have a lower carbon footprint than terrestrial sources. And to get there, we need to invest more in research, innovation, and protecting the interests and needs of small-scale fishing communities. So we have focused on climate investment vehicles like the Green Climate Fund, the Adaptation Fund, and GEF to support our efforts. Belize is among one of the first countries to seek GCF readiness financing specifically focused on adaptation and building climate resilience fisheries with very helpful guidance from the FAO. And at a national level, financing is only one factor needed for success. And Belize, along with 6 other countries in the Caribbean, are submitting proposals to GEF that is looking at promoting blue economy priorities through coastal, integrated coastal zone management, mainstreaming of biodiversity across sectors as well as geographic areas, and catalyzing climate resilient fisheries. If improved, innovative partnerships formed in putting together these proposals with key agencies will help for us to create policy coherence, synergies for effective project development, and successful project execution. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Beverly, and we look forward to hearing from you later in the Q&A session. Ms. Sierra, the floor is yours.
Hola, muy buenas tardes. Gracias por la invitación. Creo que de la costa de Belice, pues bajamos un poquito y comenzamos con la costa de Honduras. Mi nombre es Kenia Vanessa Sierra, soy la directora ejecutiva de la Mancomunidad de Municipios Garífunas de Honduras. Como tal, nosotros trabajamos con 7 alcaldes y unidades técnicas municipales con gobiernos locales acá en Honduras, y estamos representando alrededor de 130,000 habitantes en los municipios con los que trabajamos. El territorio de la Mamuga, como les mencionaba, está ubicado en la costa caribe de Honduras. Consta de 7 municipios en donde nosotros podemos encontrar diversidad multicultural. Hay poblaciones garífunas, misquitos, pech, ladinos y otros grupos originarios minoritarios. Tenemos paisajes naturales únicos, incluyendo bosques, humedales, arrecifes de coral, mangles y pastos marinos. Siguiente. Siguiente ahí. El 2020 fue un año difícil para todos. El COVID detuvo las rutinas de todos en el mundo, aunque esto no detuvo la necesidad de alimentos, más bien la agudizó. De hecho, muchas comunidades pesqueras perdieron acceso a mercados y tuvieron que depender casi al 100% del mar en esta zona para poder sostenerse y alimentarse. Sumado a esto, el pasado mes de noviembre, acá en Honduras, fue afectado fuertemente por el paso de los huracanes ETA y IOTA. Quedamos con millones en infraestructuras perdidos, centenas de personas desplazadas, presupuestos gubernamentales apretados, y un alto porcentaje de cultivos devastados, lo que amenaza la seguridad alimentaria del país, especialmente la de los más vulnerables, como muchas de las comunidades en mis municipios. Nuestra vulnerabilidad como nación se hizo ver inmediatamente. Los efectos del cambio climático pasan ya la cuenta. Con esto se tiene un contexto muy claro de cuán desprevenidos nos encontramos y sobre cuánto daño se puede sufrir a causa de este problema. Siguiente. Los desafíos más grandes con los que nos estamos encontrando en este momento es la degradación ambiental y la falta de conciencia y colaboración, no solo de las poblaciones que viven en las zonas costeras y que hacen uso de los recursos marinos, sino también de las autoridades locales y nacionales, de los usuarios de la pesca industrial, siendo estos últimos los que mayores daños provocan a las zonas del océano con su actividad económica y con la sobreexplotación de los recursos marinos. Además, nuestros marcos legales acá en el país no son un respaldo para la protección de los recursos ni para el beneficio de los más desprovistos. Siguiente. Viendo estos problemas, nosotros como institución hemos unido esfuerzos con los 7 gobiernos locales acá de nuestra zona, redes de pescadores en cada uno de los municipios, grupos organizados de mujeres, RARE y el Centro de Estudios Marinos para promover soluciones basadas en la naturaleza que aseguren la protección, restauración y gestión sostenible de los ecosistemas marino-costeros. Como actores a nivel local, reconocemos que el tener ecosistemas sanos e intactos es vital para mejorar la resiliencia. Y el proteger los ecosistemas marinos es de particular importancia para la resiliencia de comunidades pesqueras y costeras, ya que estos ecosistemas no solo sostienen muchas especies de interés comercial y ecológico, sino también protegen a nuestras costas de reducir los impactos de marejadas y huracanes. Junto con las comunidades Mamuga y las municipalidades miembros, estamos promoviendo una adaptación basada en ecosistemas para fortalecer resiliencia, asegurar el desarrollo sostenible y la seguridad alimentaria, y mejorar los medios de vida para comunidades que dependen de la pesca en pequeña escala y el ecoturismo. Siguiente. Dentro de las acciones que nosotros hemos estado realizando en coordinación con las instituciones y organizaciones que ya mencionamos, se menciona el lanzamiento de una campaña de orgullo llamada Pescando para la Vida, en la cual se enmarcan aspectos de protección de los recursos marino-costeros a través de un llamado a pescadores a adoptar comportamientos pesqueros responsables. Siguiente. También estamos gestionando la declaratoria de un sitio de importancia para la vida silvestre que se convierta en un área de derechos de acceso con redes de reserva para los pescadores artesanales responsables para los municipios de Iriona y Limón. El área abarca un total de 12 millas náuticas desde la costa, más o menos en hectáreas, 146,000 hectáreas que pretendemos se logre declarar, y se puede ver en la imagen el recuadro en rojo. Esto va a venir a beneficiar a más de 300 pescadores, asegurando medios de vida y apaciguando conflictos con la flota industrial que con frecuencia faenan en sus aguas costeras, amenazando su sustento. Siguiente. También estamos trabajando en la conformación de clubes de ahorro. Esto para fomentar resiliencia económica de las personas de las comunidades más alejadas. A la fecha de hoy, aún considerando todos los problemas que hubieron en el 2020 con la suspensión de circulación y la restricción de garantías constitucionales por la emergencia por COVID-19, logró conformar 10 clubes de ahorro en la zona, de los cuales se contabilizaron un ahorro en lempiras de 480,000 lempiras. Esto es más o menos $19,000. Para nosotros fue de gran alegría ver cómo las comunidades lograban organizarse y tenían acceso a recursos, tenían la oportunidad de ahorrar para los planes previstos en el inicio del ciclo del club de ahorro. Siguiente. También se hizo la declaratoria, una declaratoria de una zona de recuperación pesquera en la comunidad, en el municipio de de Santa Fe, la cual se llama Cayo Blanco, o mejor conocido como Cayo San Lucas en el municipio. Esta zona se hizo mediante ordenanza municipal con el fin de proteger arrecifes críticos en la zona que sostienen las pesquerías de las comunidades. Esta área tiene alrededor de 9.6 kilómetros cuadrados. Siguiente. Y mediante la campaña Pescando para la Vida hemos realizado actividades como registro de pescadores, concursos de dibujos para iniciar el proceso educativo, sensibilización y participación de los niños y jóvenes en los temas de protección de los recursos marinos. Siguiente. También se desarrolló una carrera de cayucos con el fin de incluir la participación de los pescadores en los procesos de cuidado de los recursos, así como también el rescate de prácticas ancestrales en el territorio, específicamente en el municipio de Santa Fe. Siguiente. Todas las acciones realizadas suman un objetivo común de cuidado y enfrentar los efectos del cambio climático. Este enfoque está centrado en la participación comunitaria y el liderazgo municipal. De hecho, los gobiernos locales de las municipalidades costeras han sido importantes campeones e implementadores de la gestión sostenible de los recursos, ya que mejoran la resiliencia de la pesca local y la protección costera. Siguiente, por favor. También hemos apoyado jornadas educativas con las redes de pescadores y procesos de socialización y consenso, y sobre las acciones de cuidado y mitigación en las comunidades y sus recursos. Siguiente. Sin embargo, a pesar de todo el progreso, requerimos todavía mucha más participación de otros sectores. Es uno de los grandes desafíos a los que nos estamos enfrentando para este año. Para el caso, la participación del gobierno central con programas y proyectos, con financiamiento para las nuevas ideas y para las actividades relacionadas con el cuidado del clima y específicamente con el cuidado de los recursos marino costeros. Esto es porque una buena gobernanza a nivel local y nacional debe de priorizar ecosistemas costeros saludables e intactos, y ya que esto es crucial para lograr objetivos globales como proteger la biodiversidad, mitigar y adaptarse al cambio climático, reconstruir mejor a través de esfuerzos de recuperación ecológica ante el COVID y los desastres naturales. Como directora de la Mamuga y en representación de 7 alcaldes, puedo decir que nos sentimos orgullosos de los logros a la fecha y que continuaremos trabajando junto con pescadores y actores locales, con comunidades más resilientes y prósperas, y para que se tomen en cuenta a las comunidades costeras en los planes de mitigación, adaptación y resiliencia. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Ms. Sierra. It's fascinating to see some of the parallels between Honduras and Belize, but also to hear some of the stories of individuals and communities and how they're approaching resilience in their own ways. So now, as we are running just a few minutes behind here, I'd like to turn it over to our colleagues at CI and hand the floor to Ms. Diaz-Granados. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And now Emily and I will share with you an introduction to Conservation International's Green-Gray Infrastructure Program. This photo from Guyana, it's a good visual of what green-gray infrastructure is. In this case, restored mangroves are located in front of a strengthened seawall, and the mangroves and the seawall complement each other to reduce exposure and risk to communities living along the coast. Next slide, please. This is critical because we are facing unprecedented global impacts to people and infrastructure, as you were all already listening from Dr. Vanessa Sierra mentioning what happened in other countries in the Caribbean coast. This is another photo from the coastline in Guyana, where mangroves have been removed, leaving communities even more exposed to sea level rise and storm surge. This is particularly acute in places like Guyana, where 90% of the population lives along the coast, many below the sea level. The next slide, please. There are a range of potential solutions that we can use to address this challenge. In our most built environments, a gray solution like seawalls may be the most appropriate. And on the other end of the spectrum, a poorly green solution like mangrove restoration may be the best. Green-gray infrastructure draws upon the best of our engineering achievements to create hybrid solutions along these spectrum, as you can see in this slide. Next one. This map shows Conservation International's green-gray project portfolio, where we are working to innovate and implement green-gray solutions in the communities where we work. Our work in all these locations is primarily coastal, except for WASH work in South Africa, and for freshwater green-gray work in and around Bogota in Colombia as well. We are going to share 3 cases during this presentation that convey the type of climate adaptation challenges we are facing around the world and how green-gray solutions can apply. Next slide. And going back to Colombia, to my country, I know you have heard a lot about Colombia today, but the problem we are trying to solve here is how to increase the resiliency of coastal infrastructure, like highways and ports, while at the same time restoring and conserving ecosystems. In this case, we are specifically looking at coastal highway that crosses the country's largest marsh ecosystem. When the highway was initially constructed in 1950s, it disconnected the natural flow of water and sediment between the marsh and the ocean, eventually leading to the loss of nearly 25,000 hectares of mangroves. How might we make the business case to government to invest in a green-gray infrastructure alternative to widen the highway that will restore and conserve mangroves and sand dunes and improve fisheries for local communities? Our solution is to develop a green-gray alternative that improves the connection between the marsh and the ocean and restores mangroves, and compare the social, environmental, and economic cost and benefits of the proposed gray-only project to the green-gray alternative we are developing. We started this analysis and design development last year, and we will finalize the cost-benefit analysis in the next 4 months. So far, the green-gray alternative is almost half the cost of the gray conventional alternative, and proposes to strategically locate elevated roadways, like the one you see here in the slide, where it will optimize the exchange of water between the ocean and the marsh. Next slide, and Em, I'll pass over to you.
Great, thanks, Maria Claudia. So the problem we're trying to solve in the Philippines is the vulnerability of people, especially in small island communities, to extreme weather events like typhoons. So in this case, how might we improve the resiliency using lower cost solutions that simultaneously increase biodiversity and improve livelihoods? Our solution is to combine mangrove restoration and rock breakwaters to reduce the impacts of storm surge and wave heights. We started a pilot project of this approach in 2015 in Iloilo in the central Philippines, and construction will finish in 2021. In this series of photos, we see the community of Bagogon, where 50 years ago, mangroves were cut down and their beaches eroded. This was before the community realized the value of mangroves to protect their fishery-based livelihoods and their coastline. So the green-gray solution is rebuilding back beach sands, which is about where we are now, restoring mangroves, and using rock breakwaters to reduce the exposure of the most vulnerable parts of the community to extreme weather. The problem we're trying to solve in Indonesia is that approximately 3.7 million hectares, or almost 70% of all the mangroves in Indonesia, have been damaged or degraded by aquaculture activity and industrial development. At the same time, 39.3 million people in Indonesia live in coastal zones with a high flood risk. So how might we use the economic drivers that are pushing shrimp farmers to intensify and produce more shrimp to also restore mangroves and reduce flood risks to communities living in coastal zones? Our solution is to couple the sustainable intensification of shrimp farming with restoration to provide biodiversity and community climate adaptation benefits, and design the restoration, or a portion of it, as a treatment wetland to clean water before it leaves the farm. This month, we kicked off a 2-year pilot of this approach in West Java, and through 2021, we will be conducting a scaling analysis to estimate the potential to apply this climate smart shrimp model throughout Indonesia and globally. So everything that we're doing at CI within our Green Gray program is intended to fundamentally transform the engineering and construction industry to design and build with nature, to create the next generation of climate resilient infrastructure. There are 4 integrated elements of our Green Gray program: innovating pilot projects, expanding science and engineering know-how, building the business case, and recommending policy. And within each one of these, we have specific projects and studies underway. But to reach scale with these solutions, and quickly, we realized we needed more. So just over 6 months ago, we launched a global Green Gray community of practice to amplify our work. Members of the community of practice are committed to innovating and piloting Green Gray projects, advancing the science and engineering needed to scale Green Gray solutions, increasing global awareness about Green Gray, and advocating for the acceptance and use of Green Gray solutions within policy and finance frameworks. So it's very hard to talk about good things coming from COVID. But I will say, I think that folks forced to work from home and the boom of virtual meeting software like the Exchange that we're having now has resulted in the very quick growth of our community. So in just over 6 months, we've grown to include over 70 members, including representatives from private engineering and construction firms in yellow, economists, financiers, and insurance experts in green, NGOs in blue, academics in orange, and funders and public agencies in red. So we aspire to be a community of action. And at the beginning of January, we released our very first product, a practical guide to implementing Green Gray infrastructure that was a truly crowdsourced effort as we solicited inputs and contributions from everyone within our diverse community. So the guide is a resource with a lot of information, along with 36 case studies from around the globe. This over 170-page document includes 10 chapters on how to select, design, build, and monitor Green Gray projects, influence policy, and engage stakeholders. Because the guide includes contributions from so many, including folks from multiple disciplines and backgrounds, we work to make it accessible to everyone. So we have a lot, like many of you, that we want to accomplish this year, most with the goal of influencing how we emerge from this global pandemic. We want to leverage the trillions of dollars that are likely to be invested in COVID-19 recovery to build Green Gray projects that provide biodiversity and community climate adaptation benefits. We see the Green Gray community of practice as a tool to directly address the barriers to broad engineering industry uptake of these hybrid solutions. Our ocean climate ambition, if you will, is to develop industry standards, cost and performance data for Green Gray solutions, to form multidisciplinary partnerships to bridge areas of expertise, and to develop project finance and funding mechanisms, including through multilateral funders. So we absolutely need your help to scale this work. Perhaps you or partners are interested in joining our community of practice. For example, if you have partners who are engineering and construction firms, academics, or other NGO partners. It would also be great if you can share the guide with your networks. It's available from our Green Gray community website, and I'll paste a link for you in the chat, which is the same link that you or colleagues can use to join the community. So a huge thank you to the summit organizers, Tim and Lisa for moderating, and all of you for your interest and work to safeguard climate and biodiversity now and for future generations.
That was terrific. Thanks to you both. Given that we're going to try to move the agenda along, I wanted to quickly pass it over to our co-moderator, Lisa. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. And thank you to all of our panelists. I know that it was great to be able to hear about some of the specific interventions that we're all doing across the world, and to see some of the exciting new partnerships and the photos from our actual work on the ground in the communities to really get that vivid visual of what community engagement and community resilience means. So I'm Lisa Schindler-Murray with RARE, the senior manager of our policy and partnerships work. And I'm pleased to be moderating the second half of our session here to lead us through the questions and answers. Just a quick reminder to everyone that you can submit your questions in the Q&A box or in the chat. We'll be monitoring both. But to kick things off, I wanted to bring back the poll question that we asked at the beginning of the session about where we were exploring what items might be most helpful in enhancing resilience from the experience of those in the virtual room here. And so I'm hoping that you can all see the results here, and the same as me seeing that the majority of us, well, actually, now looking at it, it's quite split. But the leading item that would be most helpful in enhancing resilience is the enhanced management capacity and funding for more effective implementation, which is not a surprise to anybody. Any of us working on this issue, and based on what we've heard from our speakers. And so the rest of the responses are really interesting to see the division of what might be the most helpful in enhancing resilience. And so with that, I think that we can kind of keep this in the back of our minds as we move into the questions to the speakers to hear a bit more about each of their programs and interventions on enhancing resilience in their own communities. And so, so we have a starting list of questions for the panelists that will give you some time to think of some questions on your own. But as I mentioned, we are hoping to have somewhat of a lively conversation to the extent that we can in Zoom. So the first question I'll give to Beverly. Belize seems to be very far along in having established a clear, formalized system for co-management and accessing and assessing, accessing catch data, working directly together with local fishers. Can you briefly comment on how well you think this is working to provide an early warning system for noticing climate impacts and in the response to that?
Thank you. So one of the biggest challenges in managing small-scale fisheries is to have a functional platform or system that's in place that allows you now to collect information from small-scale fishers. And when we implemented our spatially based managed access program, where fishers were actually licensed to fishery areas, it also came along parallelly with a system to enhance fishermen participation in the management of the fisheries, and also their participation in determining licensing approvals, and also how do we communicate with them more effectively. And so we had developed, alongside the conditions for licensing, better catch reporting systems, and also communication systems in place for us to now gather back that information from them. And so as we now engage fishers more in providing more information to us in terms of catch, in terms of impact from climatic events, it allows us as fisheries managers, one, to be able to assess the impacts of those events, but it also allows us now to plan and to build resiliency in those fishing communities as it relates to potential impacts of climatic events and potential impacts of on their everyday catch and production that they're seeing that is being impacted by changes in the environment. So we have seen more participation from the fishing community because they have now seen the benefits of the providing of that data, one, in management, in predicting catch, in setting harvest strategies, and also now in allowing us to respond to possible impacts that these events can have on their catch, and also at the end of the day on their livelihood. Thank you.
Thank you, Beverly. It's great to hear about how that effort has really increased the participation in the fishing community. I know that in a number of presentations we've heard about the importance of engaging local communities and inclusive participation for decision making, and one of the barriers could be how to activate and get that active participation from different stakeholders. And so this is an excellent example of how we can see the greater engagement from the fishing community using the data that they engage with every day, like the fish catch data you mentioned. So I have another question lined up here, this time to Vanessa. We were all very encouraged by the experience you shared and moved by the photos you shared from Honduras, based on the commitment to work together with the local stakeholders in the natural resource decision making, like we were just talking about. I'm hoping, can you share more about the general perceptions from the fishers and the community members on the impacts of climate change on their fisheries and livelihoods, and the views of using nature as one of the solutions to those impacts?
Bien, creo que hoy por hoy ni los pescadores ni las personas de las comunidades son ajenos a tener conciencia de lo que estamos sintiendo, lo que estamos sufriendo por el cambio climático. Todos están muy conscientes. Dentro de las acciones que nosotros hemos estado realizando con las comunidades, con las redes de pescadores, con los grupos de mujeres, en estas zonas más alejadas y que prácticamente el sustento, el acceso al mar es parte primordial para el sustento diario. Han sido opiniones, solicitudes de parte de las comunidades hacia nosotros. Lo que nosotros hemos estado haciendo no es imponiendo algo o tratando de que se den cuenta de algo. Nosotros hemos escuchado y recogido más bien toda la problemática que hay. Son los mismos pescadores, las mismas personas de las comunidades quienes vienen y nos cuentan a nosotros sobre cómo ha ido mermando la pesca, las faenas de pesca en cada uno de los sitios que ellos ancestralmente han usado para pescar. Entonces ha ido en disminución y eso es algo de lo que ellos están 100% conscientes. Ahora bien, lo que nosotros hemos estado haciendo prácticamente es como identificando las oportunidades que existen en los marcos legales a nivel nacional para que los beneficios lleguen a las personas lo mencionaba, oficios no reparten tipo de acción, ellos y aparte no hay una devuelta, algún beneficio para las comunidades a las cuales están siendo afectadas. Entonces siento que el apoyo de las comunidades o las percepciones de las comunidades son las realidades que ellos están teniendo y ellos realmente se dan cuenta de que el cambio climático ya llegó. Ya está, ya estamos sufriendo los efectos. No es la llegada, no es qué es lo que va a pasar después, sino qué es lo que estamos haciendo para ir minimizando este impacto que ya se siente.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. I think that you provided a lot more flavor of the importance of being able to really see the impacts in your daily life and understand what some of the causation of the climate impacts could bring, and the value of finding those solutions at the local level. So I will turn to the questions that are coming in from the chat and the Q&A box. So my next question will go to Maria Claudia, where we greatly appreciated your perspective on implementing the resilience programs in Colombia and the overview from the natural infrastructure work. Kind of moving on the government engagement side, I'm going to ask the second question here, and then we'll turn back to the first one that was on the chat in a minute. But what effect does poor coordination among government ministries and levels across the national, provincial, and local level have on projects or programs to build resiliency and adaptation? Are there examples of how this challenge has been addressed in Colombia or in other spaces that you're aware of?
Oh, thank you for the question. I think there are a couple of examples of poor coordination between national, local, and regional governments. And in fact, I think that's the majority of the cases we have in countries like mine. One of the example is what we were explaining to you. We have been suffering the impacts of a bad decision taken in the late 50s in Colombia when we constructed that road that crosses all the wetland and basically destroyed the ecosystem services from that region, and also affected directly the communities. We are trying now to work with everyone. That wetland it's very important for our coast, and there are many different levels of authority, and there are a combination of conservation strategy in place. So there are different sectors interested in the same region, and we are trying to combine all these efforts and work together towards having an example of interinstitutional and multi-sectorial way of working together and achieve not only a biodiversity conservation goal, but also including social components, economic components, and obviously cultural components. I don't know if that solves a little bit that question, but it's an example that we have in my country.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think that the question was an excellent one, and the topic of institutional arrangements is a challenge to solve, as we've all seen in our respective works, even in internal coordination across departments or sectors, which actually leads me to my next question that I see here in the Q&A. And this one will go to Emily, about, are you including land pollution from chemicals, fertilizers, and bacterial pollution in the solutions to create a healthy coastline and corals? So for the natural infrastructure work that you talked about in your presentation, are you crossing sectors and coordinating across that, and including some of those other elements in the efforts?
Great, thanks. Good question. So I think in short, we definitely aspire to do that. And I think one of the benefits of using a green-gray approach is that ecosystems provide a whole array or suite of multi-benefits, and particularly can be amazing at tools of cleaning water, capturing sediments, kind of restored watersheds and coastlines, capturing sediments before it can damage coral reefs is one example. One of the examples that we shared in our presentation that we're developing is the Climate Smart Shrimp model. And as a part of that, we will be intentionally designing a portion of the restoration area as a treatment wetland to clean the water as the effluent water, so the wastewater as it leaves the aquaculture ponds, would pass first through a treatment wetland. And it would be a combination of ecosystems that would clean and filter the water using biological and physical processes, so that by the time it gets to the receiving water and the coast, it's cleaner than it was before. And this is going to be really important with aquaculture, particularly as if kind of intensification happens, there is a higher risk of polluted water leaving shrimp ponds and negatively impacting waters along the coast. And so having these types of green-gray solutions and incorporating them into farms as they intensify will be a benefit for water quality, adaptation, resilience, and biodiversity and fisheries.
Great, thank you so much, Emily. I think we have time for just one more question. And so I will, I guess, take the opportunity to throw another question towards Beverly about, can you, I guess, briefly touch on any considerations on food security and nutrition implications to the coastal resilience efforts that you shared in your presentation? We're interested in hearing more about the food security angle when it is related to coastal resilience and to climate resilience.
So I think in general, we need to, as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, is to recognize the centrality of food production. One of the things also that COVID-19 has really showed us is that there is a need for us to now look at how we can now bolster production in fisheries, but at the same time ensure that we have the regimes in place which demonstrates long-term sustainability and resiliency in those resources and communities. One of the things is that fisheries production has become even more important for food security domestically. And also not only food security, but also from a livelihood standpoint, which also has a lot to do with community resiliency. And in our small scale fisheries scenario, the people who are engaged in our domestic fisheries are poor communities. They're the poorest of the communities nationally. And so fisheries play an important role in food security, both domestically and now from a global standpoint, and also to ensure that we continue to have livelihoods protection and also resiliency in these very important communities and households. Thank you.
Thank you, Beverly. That was an excellent way to end our Q&A session. I think that we've heard a number of inspiring examples of the realities of resilience efforts on the ground using natural infrastructure or other nature-based solutions, and the important role that fisheries plays, whether that's domestically or globally, as well as some of the more humbling challenges that we face that are amplified in the face of a changing climate. So while we reached the end of our time, we had originally had a song to close on for you from the Rare Philippines program on local leadership and community pride in the restoration and conservation activities for their mangrove and coastal ecosystem work, in recognizing the importance of enhancing climate resilience and food security in their communities. And we are unfortunately unable to share the video with you on Zoom right now because there's some technical difficulties, but we'll put that in the chat for you to listen to after the summit. And hopefully it can give you a little bit of joy and energy as you continue through the rest of your day or evening. Maybe even dance along to it while thinking about community-based natural resource management and improving climate resilience. So again, I'd like to just take the opportunity together with the other co-organizers of this session, Environmental Defense Fund, Conservation International, and Rare, to thank you for joining. And we will continue to the next session. So there'll be a brief pause as we transition sessions, and thank you again for joining.
Well, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this final panel of the summit, Decarbonizing the Global Economy, the Role of Shipping and Ports. My name is Daniel Hubble, and I am the Shipping Emissions Campaign Manager for Ocean Conservancy. I'll serve as the moderator for this important session. If you're just joining us, welcome. If you've been here for the whole 2 days, thank you for sticking with us, and congratulations on reaching the final panel. Just to lay a few ground rules, if you're new to this, we will have a brief discussion, or we will have all of our panelists speak, and then we will have a Q&A session running until about 6:55 DC time to give a little bit of space for our final speaker. If you'd like to ask a question of the panel, please type it into the Q&A, but we also try and keep an eye on the chat as we go along. We also are offering this session in simultaneous translation into Spanish or English. You can find that just by queuing the button at the bottom. Unfortunately, that's not available on YouTube, so if you're watching, my apologies for that if language shifts over. With that said, let's get right into it, and I'm going to turn the floor over to Aoife O'Leary, the Director of the International Climate Program for the Environmental Defense Fund, to give some framing remarks.
Thanks so much, Dan. Hi, everyone. I hope you're having a good day or evening or night, as I am. So I just want to frame the climate impact of international shipping a little bit before our panel gets going. So as we all know, shipping is a key part of not just the ocean economy, but the entire world economy. Many people rely on it for their livelihood, and it's also essential for international trade. Meanwhile, it emits 3% of all greenhouse gases worldwide each year. And that's about on par with the emissions of a G7 country. And emissions from shipping have been rising overall for quite a long time. And there are no global policies in place to tackle those emissions. In addition, emissions of methane and black carbon, which have a really bad impact in especially a short time frame, have been growing as a share of shipping emissions. So it's really, really urgent that the climate community comes together to address emissions from shipping. So now that doom and gloom is out of the way, I'm actually quite optimistic because we do have identified solutions. There are clear actions that existing ships can take to reduce emissions, such as slow steaming, using wind propulsion, maximizing the use of energy efficiency technologies. And we have fuels of the future that are emerging. These are probably going to be hydrogen-based, but they can completely decarbonize shipping if made from renewable energy. So green hydrogen or green ammonia. But getting these fuels fully developed must happen quickly, especially when you consider that ships last for an average of 25 years. So if we want to decarbonize by 2050, like we really, really need to be doing it now. And in addition, these fuels are considerably more expensive. So we're really going to need policy to drive this change. So the International Maritime Organization is the UN body that regulates international shipping. And they have been discussing what to do about shipping emissions for over 2 decades. But I'm still optimistic that things can be achieved in the IMO. We'll hear later on the panel from some on a potential policy suggestions that are going to go to the IMO for discussion very soon. And also things are happening on a regional and a national level. The European Union has made it clear that they are looking at putting shipping in the emissions trading system. Simultaneously, we have a new Biden administration, which is very exciting. And while we haven't heard any pronouncements on maritime emissions specifically, the Biden administration is clearly very serious about climate change. So we'll be watching out for anything they might do on shipping. But aside from those discussions, it's really important to remember that one of the key findings from a report that was released last year by the IMO on greenhouse gases from shipping showed that previous studies actually dramatically is maybe a good word for 2021. Anyway, dramatically underestimated the share of greenhouse gases that come from domestic shipping. So the reality is domestic shipping is about 30% of all greenhouse gases worldwide, or of all international shipping emissions. Sorry, domestic shipping account for 30% of all shipping emissions. And these emissions are completely within the power of national governments to reduce. And one of the great things about domestic shipping as well is that quite often it is the smaller vessels that are emitting these pollutants. And there are even better solutions that can come in quickly, etc. For smaller vessels. We're much more technologically advanced. So it'd be great to hear from the national governments. We're going to hear on the panel soon what they are doing domestically to tackle these emissions. And I know we're also going to hear from Rasmus in Trafigura about a potential global solution. So on that note, I will dramatically hang back to Dan, and I'm sure you can't tell that it's 11 p.m. my time, and I'm need another cup of tea before the end of this. So Dan, thank you.
Thank you, Aoife. And obviously, we're really grateful for you and the other panel who have decided to, or have been able to join us at this extremely late hour. I think this would normally in maritime terms be called working the graveyard shift. So let's quickly introduce our panel, and then we'll give everybody a chance to speak. First will be His Excellency Thomas Anker Christensen, the Climate Ambassador for Denmark. Previously, he served as Danish Ambassador to Cairo, has long experience in the field of climate. Then we will have Alexis Rodriguez, who is the Panama Canal Authority's Environmental Protection Specialist, working for an autonomous division within the Panamanian government. Followed by Joshua Berger, the Governor's Sector Lead for Maritime Issues within the state of Washington, United States. He is the key liaison between maritime industry stakeholders, the Governor's Office, legislature, and state agencies. And finally, Rasmus Bach-Nielsen, Global Head of Fuel Decarbonization for Trafigura, where he works to reduce the group's shipping emissions footprint. Without further ado, Your Excellency, Thomas, if you'd like to proceed.
I'd love to, Dan, but I can't turn on my camera. Ah, there it goes. Hello, everyone. I'll beat the previous speaker. It's midnight in Copenhagen, and so it must be for a number of people on this in this meeting. But Dan, just to add to my bio, I spent a year working as special advisor to Peter Thomson when he had been appointed special envoy for the ocean of the UN Secretary General. And as his chief of staff, I was part of the team organizing the first UN Ocean Conference in New York in 2017. And so I do have some connection to the ocean community. In fact, I do think I was even part of a group discussing setting up the Friends of the Ocean track inside the UNFCCC. And talking about shipping, that is, of course, one of these sectors that is in a gray zone between being sort of ocean-based. It's covered by SDG 14, but also being very much related to climate and also energy. And the approach of the shipping sector and the, I would also say, partly the energy community is to look at it as one of those hard to abate or hard to decarbonize sectors in terms of energy. And I'll get back to that. It's sort of a crossover sector. But of course, the challenge of dealing with shipping is then aggravated by the fact that shipping in the high seas outside national jurisdiction is not covered by the Paris Agreement. That's why the conversation and the negotiation inside the IMO is so important, because in a way that's an add-on legislative or regulatory process to the one that national governments can control. And as was just said, in the European Union, of which Denmark is a member, that is being dealt with also at European Union level. So it's not a national decision by Denmark. Just a few words on where we are and what's happening with Denmark's global engagement on this, because I would echo what was just said, that the policy, technology and investments discussions are advancing across the hard to abate sectors at a speed and scale that we couldn't imagine just a few years ago, and definitely not in Paris. And that's why there is some cause for optimism. In New York in 2019, Denmark facilitated the Getting to Zero Coalition for Shipping at the Climate Action Summit. That's also where Maersk, the world's largest shipping company, which is Danish, announced its target to be a zero net shipping company by 2050. And they sort of took the lead on the shipping side, ship owners and managers side, to establish this coalition, which now consists of 150 private sector actors collaborating across sectors and the entire shipping value chain to develop CO2 neutral commercially viable vessels by 2030 and carbon neutrality in shipping by 2050. And as was said, emission-free fuel is the key. Green hydrogen, which you can produce through the so-called Power-to-X process, will give us an opportunity to decarbonize both shipping, but also aviation, heavy transport, steel, aluminium, even plastic, all these hard to abate sectors. It is a daunting task. And in addition to the deep sea vessels, it requires infrastructure for scalable zero carbon energy sources, including production, distribution, storage, and bunkering across the international trade routes. And the green energy that is needed also needs dramatically to be scaled up in order to produce this green hydrogen. Offshore wind farms, like the one you see behind me in my picture, is where we will be producing our energy for the green hydrogen. Denmark has a plan to install almost double our current demand in offshore wind, our current energy demand through offshore wind farms on artificial islands by 2030, and use the additional energy to, well, one, export, and two, produce green hydrogen. We also think that it will require massive investments into shipping and shipbuilding, and therefore the Poseidon principles that were adopted in 2019 by pension funds, banks, and financial institutions that represent around $150 billion are an important tool for investors to evaluate the climate footprint of the fleet they are funding. We also actively, as Denmark, support the ban of the heavy fuel oil in the IMO. The use and carriage of HFOs in the Arctic impact the climate change, health, and environment. We believe the ban will contribute to further emissions reductions of CO2, SOx, and particulates and by introducing alternative fuels in Arctic shipping, we will see significantly reduced emissions and impacts, as well as risks associated with the use and carriage of heavy fuel oil. In Denmark, we have created private sector partnerships to work on mitigation across 13 climate partnerships, including with the shipping community, the so-called Blue Denmark sector. And they have made recommendations to our national policies that flow into this policy of green fuels, vessels, and power to X. And a recommendation for other governments is to maybe look at partnering up with your private sector in achieving your 2050 targets. The Maersk family has also made an investment into this by establishing, through their philanthropy, the Maersk Mc-Kinney Møller Center for Zero Carbon Shipping, where they have been joined by 7 or 8 large companies to really drill down into the zero carbon shipping technology, shipbuilding, and fuel. It has an initial capital of $64 million. On the government side, we are also proposing to set up a new mission under Mission Innovation on the decarbonization of shipping. As you know, Mission Innovation is a platform under which governments and private sector collaborate to scope missions related to innovation and green technologies. And our proposal is to set up this new shipping Mission Innovation and to launch it at the upcoming meeting under Mission Innovation in Chile later this year. We would focus on supporting the Getting to Zero Coalition and to align with the Paris targets, the trajectory of the shipping sector through technology and innovation, in order to make sure that zero-emission vessels start entering the global fleet by 2030 or sooner, due to this average operational time span of 20 to 25 years, so that we can make sure that ships that enter the global fleet in 2030 are doing their job in 2050 and beyond. Finally, let me just echo what was said on the IMO. It is the forum for the international regulation, but the processes are very slow, and we urgently need more action and higher ambitions faster. Another option would, of course, be a global carbon levy, which would be effective, but is currently unlikely. And finally, just as I've said, with the examples of the various shipping coalitions, we think that multi-stakeholder collaboration across sectors and value chains are extremely effective in moving action forward. And I would offer to all of you to join efforts with us in pushing political ambition through these multilateral efforts. So thank you very much, Dan.
Thank you very much, Thomas, and greatly appreciate you raising your connection to the oceans as well. Of course, I probably should have brought that in my remarks, but I really appreciate you bringing it around. Next up, we have Alexis Rodriguez from the Panama Canal Authorities. Alexis, if you please.
Sorry. Hello, everyone. Today I want to speak a little bit about the process of the decarbonization and all the framework that we are working here at the Panama Canal. Also, it's interesting because we have different point of view about, for example, the international frameworks that is necessary to apply. Because as some of the speakers said before, we have both what we have to do in land and also what we have to do in sea. That is IMO, UNFCCC, and that. So I will share a little presentation with you, and that is, share my screen here. Okay, here now. So I will speak a little bit about the challenge and opportunities, taking into account what yesterday Mr. Kerry said about the mix of ocean and climate. And I think that this is really important to mix that, because we have some regulations that are looking forward to prevent all the problems in the ocean, but that belongs from the climate framework. So the first thing that I think that we need to understand is the international framework, the biodiversity of different rules that we need to apply in different sectors. And in our case, we have to work together, for example, Sustainable Development Goals, Paris Agreement, IMO regulations, the IMO strategy, the local regulation, also the regional regulation that are developing in some areas of the planet, but also the biodiversity and the UNCLOS Convention. That is really important because when we mix all that kind of regulations, we can talk for air quality, greenhouse gas emission, decarbonization, and the protections of the sea. So that is really important to understand each objective and how they work together. Because in that sense, we will make something that is really important in this process, is the planning, is how we implement all these regulations in the sense that we can apply. For example, you could have the point of view of governments, entities, you could have the point of view of ports, of shipping companies, of stakeholders. So that is really important, is how we can cooperate and work together to achieve all the goals that we have in different frameworks. The other part is how we can implement that. And we developed something interesting that we call the Green Route Strategy. And that is the first part that we recommend, to talk about a good strategy that look forward in short, mid, and long term. Why? Because when we go to the frameworks, we talk about 2030, 2050, 2040, different goals, different objectives, and they are looking in the same way in how we implement short measures, how we can contribute in that way, also how we can work, for example, in mid and long term to make the process of decarbonization. So in that sense, we focus in 4 main objectives, that is our operations, how we can improve that, how we can make that roadmap to be carbon neutral, zero carbon, and that stuff. The other one is how we mix that with our projects, how we have an operation that mix all the new projects and the future project, for example, the water quality and quantity that we are working in a long-term vision. The third one, and the most important for us in the environment, is the watershed, how we work with the environment conservation process, and we continue that process here in the Panama Canal watershed. The other one is understand our customers, our clients, work together with that clients, understand what are the development that they are making, how they are looking forward, all these requirements. For example, we will have some clients that use gas, that use methanol, that are planning to use hydrogen, that are planning to use ammonia. So that is really important because when you mix that with your operations, you need to know what are the future for that customers. And I put something new that is something that we are working in that strategy is digital transformation and research and development. Why? Because all the process of planning and a strategy need to be aligned with that digital transformation. We are talking in the process of decarbonization by, for example, just-in-time process, reducing all that kind of connections between the customers and the operation. So that is really important. We need to make more technology process. We are in an ocean conference, so we need to talk about that. When we mix climate and oceans, we need to understand something, that the first key for a good protection program in water, on the oceans, is a spatial planning. When you have a planification, a spatial planification in the areas, it's really easy to implement a protection program. In that sense, the Panama Canal is working with the local authorities, for example, in the National Oceans Policy, We are a stakeholder in that commission, also in all the programs, for example, our oceans that will be the next year in Panama, and all that stuff. Why? Because in the sense that we work in the ocean protection, but a spatial planning, and mix all the system, for example, navigation, tourism, and local communities, we can achieve that goals that we need to understand that oceans is really important with the climate. And I want to finish with something that we call the good practice. Is the moment, is the time that each authority, government, entity, stakeholder, company, put all their good practice, all the knowledge, all the research and development, and give that capacity building together. It's really important to put all the parts of the world together, because sometimes we have so many plans and so many interesting projects in the other areas from the world. But when we want to mix that, we need to understand that shipping, the oceans are together. We are talking about an international sector that have the same vessels that arrive to, for example, America, arrive to Asia, arrive to Europe. So we need to think forward in the same developments, because in that way we could talk, for example, in a short, mid, and long-term strategy that will be applied together. In that sense, today we launched something that we call the dashboard of the CO2 emissions. What is the objective of this dashboard? It's only to give to our customers what are the savings of CO2 by taking short route, using, for example, the parameters of the IMO, but also how they are contributing in that way using a route that are not getting pollutants, for example, or getting some problems with the ocean, and in a route that we are promoting how to work together to achieve all the goals of the Paris Agreement, of the IMO, and also biodiversity. That is really important, so this is the way. So thank you.
Thank you, Alexis. And I appreciate you bringing the ocean into this important conversation, and also tying that linkage to the goals that are that companies are going to trying to help companies set the metrics that they need to meet. Next up, we have Josh Berger. If you'll please take it away, Josh.
Hey, thank you, Dan. I really appreciate the opportunity to join you today. Yeah, I work as Governor Jay Inslee's Maritime Sector Lead in the state of Washington here in the US, and I am the board chair and founder of an organization called Washington Maritime Blue, which is a strategic alliance of multi-sector stakeholders that is really charged to implement back our state's strategy for the blue economy. That plan that is working to accelerate innovation, investment with our finance sector, as well as public dollars, and sustainability and decarbonization in the maritime and ocean sectors. I'm really encouraged to hear the other speakers really focusing on the how, because I think that's really what I was hoping to focus on, because what I want to share is really how coordination and multi-stakeholder partnerships have really contributed to our success in starting kind of down that journey of maritime decarbonization and investment in that space. We think that we have created really a model for the nation here in the US and helping to influence kind of a new direction here in the United States, or a renewed focus here in the United States, really as necessary tools to support both the necessary R&D, investment, but also these ecosystems for innovation that it's going to take for us to achieve, like this term around a hard to abate sector in achieving those national and global targets. And I think, we all agree, I think, on the necessity of various targets and maybe even the end goal. But I think as we negotiate this, what we're hearing from Alexis and others is, while we're negotiating these end goals, we also have to recognize and enable and incentivize the how. And this is how we're spending, quite a bit of our time here in Washington State. especially as the globe over is focused on economic recovery at the same time, in blending both of our ability to address the climate crisis within ocean action, as well as economic recovery efforts that we need to be looking at globally, opportunities to be investing in the clean energy infrastructure, the clean energy future, and doing that in renewed ways, right? And thinking about mechanisms that we have seen in other sectors where we can combine kind of that proverbial hybrid capital stack. So how do we maximize and coordinate from the early stages of these key demonstration projects, bringing in the resources and energy from multiple sectors? I don't have to repeat, I think, some of the numbers and the opportunities in this space, but it's important as we're engaging, particularly our industry and finance partners, that we remember OECD's prediction that this space is going to double by 2030, a $3 trillion industry. When we look at the more recent reports by the UN high-level panel on, in some sectors, a 1 to 14 ratio of ROI and investment in this space in multiple different areas that have been talked about over the last couple of days. We're seeing nations in Europe and Asia investing billions in zero emission solutions, as well as their ecosystems to get them there in this kind of coordinated and organized approach. And they are drastically reducing emissions. They're increasing safety. They're helping to save billions in operational costs and thus incentivizing industry to invest in these ecosystems and R&D. And they're creating new markets, which is all going to drive capital investment along with our public dollars into creating jobs and supporting these communities. So in the state of Washington, that's what we decided that was a course that we wanted to set. We have a $37 billion maritime sector just here in the state of Washington. And to kind of build on and stay competitive on the global stage, we want to build on really that interdependence in that sector, leveraging our expertise, our research institutions, the tech industry, advanced manufacturing, ocean engineering and technology, all to drive this investment and commitment. You add that to our long history and commitment to environmental performance and quality craftsmanship and management practices, we can kind of couple that culture of innovation and investment. So in 2017, Governor Inslee authorized a Maritime Innovation Advisory Council and myself to engage kind of the depth and breadth of maritime and ocean stakeholders and come up with a clear strategy on how we drive forward what we call a sustainable blue economy. And it really focused on 5 strategic areas: deep decarbonization in the maritime sector, creating in our region a global hub for innovation and investment, a real focus on what we call green gateways and working waterfronts, creating jobs at the same time as a clean energy future, that we're creating a 21st century workforce that's equitable. Here in Washington State, the average age in this industry is 57 years old, and it's predominantly older white men. So a real focus on our workforce efforts as well into decarbonization is focused on supporting youth of color and young women to come and find opportunities in this sector, as well as ensuring that we do that as a world-class cluster and organized. So, as we're wrapping up the strategy development, we also looked out and looking for really clear mechanisms that we can start implementing on day one. So the strategy is as good as the graphics, right? Unless we actually have accountability to start implementing right away. And so what we consistently found in other world-class maritime regions was this quadruple helix approach, in forming organized coalitions of industry and government and research institutions, NGOs, workforce and community partners, all working to advance and accelerate innovation and sustainability. In order to kind of ensure that accountability, we formed and spun out an independent organization, a coalition, much like what you're seeing with the Getting to Zero Coalition and many others, as a strategic alliance to move that forward. Since then, now 2 years ago, we're 100 plus members and includes everything from global OEMs to one-person engineering shops, major transportation companies, but also our national laboratories and university research institutions, community partners, public agencies, transit authorities, and the like. What we do is we focus, like what was discussed, on what we call joint innovation projects. How do we demonstrate this and actually get stuff done, right? We bring together an entire supply chain, including those research institutions and financing at the very early stage of this, to move forward, solve problems, and commercialize technologies. So examples of that is electrifying the nation's largest ferry system, the Washington State Ferry System, both electrifying the vessels and the shoreside infrastructure to support charging. We're in the process of designing and working with a group of folks on a zero emission, high-speed foiling ferry. We're working on green hydrogen production and infrastructure for cold ironing for now, and as well as increasing utility resilience and others. We also support entrepreneurship. We're trying to drive private capital to accelerate the technology adoption and bringing these new founders and entrepreneurs into this space. In just the last 2 years, we've engaged 22 different startups and have seen over $70 million of private capital invested into decarbonization efforts. And that's everything from new battery technology to electric outboard engines and everything that's going to kind of feed in and support this work to accelerate. You know, I think what we thought was a good idea 3 years ago when we began this work in earnest is even a more important and prescient area now. And we are at the beginning of this new decade of the ocean. We're investing in the blue economy as the potential to support, you know, economic recovery and the infrastructure for our clean energy future. And it's really a once in a lifetime opportunity to create that nexus and bring investment in from all of those different important actors, our public sector, our new administration, the private sector, and those research dollars connecting all of that together. So we're excited that this is being a model that we can project and share nationally. We know coalitions are being built right now in a national effort following many of these models of joint demonstration projects and the like, and connecting to this global space. So, you know, we're ready. We're ready with a clear agenda and vision. We know what we want and how we want to draw investment into these communities and build coalitions and partnerships. We're ready to invest in ourselves and our neighbors and colleagues so that we can really honor, you know, this maritime heritage and legacy while innovating for a sustainable blue economy in the future. So appreciate the opportunity to be here and engage further as we get into the Q&A portion. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you so much, Josh. Just to move on to our final speaker, Rasmus. It sounds like a lot of folks are excited to talk about your proposal. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Dan. I wanted to be here tonight. I have 7 minutes to talk about something I could talk about for an extensive amount of hours. A little bit about me. Until 6 months ago, I was running the biggest tanker fleet in the world with Trafigura. Trafigura is a privately owned global trading house. We trade 5.5% of global oil consumption every day. We are the second biggest metals and mineral trader. We're the biggest LNG trader. We control a very significant fleet ourselves, and we are a very significant user of third-party shipping services. Trafigura has $61 billion of credit lines. Trafigura has come to the conclusion that we need to decarbonize much faster than what is currently possible. Yeah, we have analyzed in depth how is this going to be feasible. Back in 2019, we started on a study with Texas A&M, a number of PhD experts in exploring what is fuels of the future. A lot of time and money spent. Conclusion is clear. Transport fuels of the future are hydrogen-based. For shipping, for international ocean-going ships, that means either green methanol or green ammonia. Green methanol, you overtake other industries' problems, as in capturing carbon that you then burn through your funnel. Green ammonia, as of today, is the cleanest possible transport fuel. The challenge is with the hydrogen-based fuels, they are much more expensive than the current fuels available for use. The solution is in front of us, and it sits within the IMO. Yeah, there are a number of regional measures being worked on. Aoife mentioned the EU ETS scheme, which is positive in its fact that it's pushing decarbonization forward, but it's negative in the way that the global shipping industry needs a global regulatory framework. And as both Thomas and Aoife said, it needs to be through the IMO. In September last year, Trafigura made a proposal for a global IMO-led shipping decarbonization program. In this lies a number of key items. Going back to the fact that the hydrogen-based fuels are more expensive than the current fuels, we have proposed a global carbon levy, and a little bit contrary to what you said, Thomas, well, we believe a global carbon levy is needed, it is possible, but maybe the comment that wasn't added is that it has to be through the IMO, and only through the IMO does it have a chance of being a success. The global carbon levy has to be around $250 to $300 per metric tons of CO2 equivalent emitted. Over time, technology costs of developing the hydrogen-based fuels will come down. Electrolyzer costs will come down. This is the anticipation. This is technology evolution. However, it is likely to happen. But the challenge that the global shipping industry has today, and I've been in the epicenter of it, sitting on the biggest trading floor in the world, running the biggest tanker fleet, understanding what drives behavioral change, then we need the regulatory framework. Today, we don't have that regulatory framework. And the challenge within almost all of the IMO member nations, they use past decision-making processes to make conclusions on what will happen in the future. This is totally wrong. Requirements of the society in the last 12 months have changed completely. The IMO member states have a much bigger responsibility than I think they are currently realizing. It is sad, yeah, but it's something that we are working to change, other people are working to change. The existing technologies for ocean-going ships, they are not sufficient for shipping to decarbonize fast enough. This is for the companies themselves, this is for the stakeholders, this is for the financing banks, and that's for the shareholders. So what can we do? Okay, we need this carbon levy to be introduced. There's been a proposal. We have defined it as a fee-based structure where there's a CO2 profile of the transport fuels, and there's not so many of them, so it's not a difficult task. Let's say there's 6 to 8 transport fuels. It's high sulfur fuel oil, it's low sulfur fuel oils, it's MGO, it's LNG, it's LPG, it's methanol, the methanol we know today, and then we will have the hydrogen-based fuels. If you create a benchmark of the fuels, then if there is a use of a fuel which emits more than the benchmark, the client, and this would be Trafigura or alike, would have to pay that extra CO2 cost. That money would have to be channeled back into subsidizing zero or low carbon fuels. It is very important that this money does not get diverted outside the industry. In such case, the industry players will not be able to support such a carbon levy mechanism within the IMO. So the funds has to remain in the industry. It's been one of the challenges with past regulations. It is actually possible. This is the first thing. The second part and the third part that we have factored into our proposal is we have factored in a little bit of a percentage to R&D. There's a current decision-making process within the IMO where there is a $2 per metric ton levy, which is to be distributed into R&D. People today in the IMO, they think that this will do it. But it's just a drop in the ocean, because if you look at what is really required, it's $250 to $300 per CO2 ton emitted. But when it was proposed and started being worked on in 2017 and 2018, it was a very aggressive target. The challenge is the goalpost has moved. Yeah. So that is just to say that industry players would not like a significant part of the funds to be distributed to other technology owners who in the future will benefit. And it will disincentivize behavioral change. And the key, what we see and what I've seen personally from sitting on the trading floor, running a huge fleet, is we need factors that can drive behavioral change. The last bit that we have put in our proposal, and we cannot propose it ourselves because we are not an IMO member state, is support to small island states. Understanding the decision-making process within the IMO. It takes a lot of consensus, and small island states will face higher transportation costs, etc. So we have supported a small percentage, unnamed percentage of support, financial support to the small island states. But overall, and for the sake of time, then I finish off, it's very clear that it is possible. It can happen much sooner than 2030, yeah? So the targets by 2050 as of today, they are way too passive. Yeah, we can decarbonize much faster than what people think. One last comment, a factual comment: the engine technology is ready by 2024. Yeah, ocean-going ships can retrofit by 2025, and new ships can have the new technology from Q4 24. The last challenge we have: who's going to offtake very expensive hydrogen-based fuels if they don't have the regulation? It goes back to what is the core of the challenge, and the core of the challenge is that IMO member states have to step up immediately so we can get a global carbon levy run by the IMO, and then you will have shipping decarbonization happening much faster than what any people dare thinking of. I support a lot of things that's been said so far from Eva, Thomas, etc., Joshua. We have to work hard, but the good thing for global shipping, the solution is there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rasmus, and really appreciate the sort of bold vision you're offering for ocean climate ambition in this sector. And I think that's actually an excellent point for us to pivot to our question and answers. Just a quick reminder, if you've got any that you'd like us to ask for the panel, please just send it to us in the Q&A. But to start with, just one from me. Thomas, let's begin with you. Considering the long lifespan of vessels that multiple folks on the panel have raised, and the strict timeline for keeping within a 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius emission goal, that's going to require lots of actions from all sectors, as from all aspects of the industry and government, as many of you have raised already. What do you see as the critical decisions, both regulatory and commercial, surrounding decarbonization and shipping this decade?
Thank you, Dan. And could I just comment on Rasmus before I dig in? I mean, Rasmus, I've spent 10 years in the climate space working with the best economists in the world who all say that a global carbon price on carbon is the best way to move forward. And I fully agree. And it's a great theory. Unfortunately, it's yet to be proven in practice. And practice in my world is one where you have to get 193 or 196 governments to agree on it. I mean, be my guest if you can manage to make that happen. Getting them to agree on the Paris Agreement was difficult enough. Agreeing on a global tax on CO2 emissions, I think for many investors and for many for many businesses, for many years, that was a good excuse not to act and not to move into making necessary investments or changes to their technology, because they were leaning back and saying, well, give us a carbon price and then we'll do what's necessary. We worked for years to get the Paris Agreement based on the assumption that you have to act now, based on what you can do. And in a way, that would also be my advice to the shipping industry. And I think that's what's happening now, is that ship owners, ship financiers, fuel producers are all starting to act also in the absence of a levy, because the necessity of taking action on also shipping, given the status of the planet and of the ocean, simply dictates the need to act. And so by all means, let's work on a carbon levy, but let's not slow down whatever else we're doing while trying to get there. Now, to your question, Dan, the challenge, and I think Josh, Rasmus, everyone has sort of pointed to it, is that you cannot see shipping in a bubble. Yes, building the vessels is unique to the ships, but to get the ecosystem of energy transformation in place that allows us to have the green hydrogen at scale and at a cost that is competitive with the current bunker fuels takes a global transformation of energy production and supply. And it takes investments into not only energy, but also into ports, into fueling systems, and it has to happen at scale. And I'm reminded of the Chile climate champion, Gonzalo Munoz, who said recently that that when we have the decarbonized ships in 2050, that will be the proof that everything else has changed. In a way, the decarbonized ships in 2050 is the end of the change of the whole supply and value chain of energy and ships. And for that, you need the regulatory environment, you need the cost to come down, you need the scale of the production of both the ships and the energy and the green hydrogen, and you need to do it at an energy intensity of the fuel that is similar to what you currently have to fuel the ships. So it is a real enormous undertaking of changing the whole system. I share Rasmus's optimism. I think it can be done. I think we're off to an extraordinary positive pathway that, as I said in my first intervention, even a couple of years ago, we couldn't even have seen that take off. The fact that we now in Denmark have taken the decision on building 2 energy islands with up to 10 gigawatt of green of wind energy for the production also of green hydrogen speaks to that. We believe that this is where the future lies. And by the way, just to end there, our calculations also show that for every gigawatt of offshore wind you install, you also gain about 14,000 jobs. And I think in the current political climate with the crisis and the pandemic, the job creation dimension of this systems change is extremely important as well. Let me stop here.
Thank you, Thomas. Yes, Rasmus, I see you would like
I'll
to...
be very quick. Now listen, just to be clear, we definitely support all the current initiatives, energy design efficiencies, etc. We don't think the last IMO decisions were strong enough. A lot is being done in the shipping industry to decarbonize. We just don't think it is sufficient to decarbonize in the transformational world, to use your word, Thomas, that we are living in. The world has transformed and past decision-making process will not suffice for the future. The world has changed.
Thank you, Rasmus. Cognizant of the time we've got left, I'd ask the same question to you, Alexis, and to you, Joshua, as well, in that order, if you would like to respond. If you don't, feel free to just take a path.
Okay, I think that this is important to the framework, you know, as they mentioned before, our partners here, speakers, the framework has been developed in the IMO, for example, has a technical point of view all the time. So I think that it's really important to finalize the framework, for example, to 2023, to define the other additional things that we have to add to the initial strategy. Actually, we have only 2 years, and we have a little delay by the COVID-19 in all the meetings. It's really important to get, again, for example, the meetings in IMO to follow up all these, for example, regulations. The other part is when we talk about commercial, is the business as usual. We need to integrate, for example, not only our customers, but the final customer, what they want, and they want a clean supply chain. So in that sense, all the commercial and the regulatory framework need to work together with the authorities and the representative, for example, that you mentioned before, IMO. So in that sense, we can look forward to complying this decarbonization process. But as I mentioned before, the most important thing here is to work together in a cooperation framework, integrate regulations as only one point of view, because in the sense that we are, for example, getting different regulations around the world, some parts that will enter in that all supply chains like America, Africa, or other parts of the world will get out of this advance and capacity building. So we need to work in an international framework with the integration of technology, digital transformation, but also to new developments and that could be applied in different parts of the world.
Alexis. Josh.
Yeah, Dan, and I know we're running short on time, but I think what we're hearing is this both and approach, right? And I think as quickly and as necessary as this behavior change is globally and transforming kind of the markets and the enormity of the infrastructure that's going to need to change as well, is we need to start showing some examples of where this level of cooperation and commitment works. So we're working on actualizing projects just like that, and then looking to scale, bringing a utility, the finance mechanisms, the public dollars, the research institutions, and private capital to actualize a project here and a project there along those realms. At the same time, finding the examples that Norwegians are interested in the NOx fund. I mean, it's focused on NOx, but it's the same concept as that carbon fee, is those dollars go right back into R&D. So if we can start kind of on a pilot scale while we're addressing, I think, kind of this global framework, is how we're kind of getting stuff done, helping to support behavior change so we can kind of build trust in that system and start to accelerate. So I really appreciate and as well share both the optimism and the willingness to pull up our sleeves and start getting work done.
Thank you so much, Josh. And I guess finally, Aoife, if you have any dramatic final words to close this out. Well, all right. Without further ado, I can only thank the panel so much and wish that we could do this in person again someday. It sounds like we would have a lot more to carry on the discussion well beyond an hour, but thank you again. And I'll turn the floor over to my colleague, Anna Marie Laura, to take it out and close this out.
Thank you so much, Dan. We have certainly covered a lot of ground today, and thank you all for sticking with us throughout these incredible sessions. We've heard about projects and strategies that are realizing adaptation and mitigation, and then just now, discussing global policies that create the enabling conditions for them. So it's been really great. There's clearly no shortage of ocean-based climate solutions that can be integrated not only into NDCs, but also into other development and sustainability frameworks. As our last and final speaker today, I would like to introduce the World Chairman and Ambassador at Large for the International Human Rights Commission, Dr. Muhammad Sahid Amin Khan. His Excellency Dr. Khan is the 4th World Chairman of the IHRC and the first Muslim and Asian elected from its members in its history. He is also the Chairman of World Peace Mission Organization, and we are very grateful for his being here today and providing a new perspective today. So thank you, Ambassador. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. This is an honor for me to be a part of this prestigious summit. I'm thankful to Mrs. James and Mr. Jacob from the Ocean Conservancy and his team. You are all very excellent, tremendous people doing a great job for saving the future of our coming generations. Not only the coming generations, also you are doing a great job to protect our earth and oceans together. Ladies and gentlemen and distinguished guests, Ocean Climate Ambition Summit is a landmark for the peoples and for our earth, because when we are talking about the climate change and the oceans cannot be separated from each other, as it's most important and significant for the people of the world. It's our responsibility to keep our oceans and our coastal communities healthy and prosperous. Today we seen the discussions in this high-level sessions and the other sessions as well on the advancing ocean-based climate solutions. I was very much happy to hear many of distinguished guests with the solutions, with their remarkable efforts and with their input and contribution to make this world more safer for the coming generation and for the present generations. In my submission, we see the oceans has taken the burden of a human-made climate change. Absorbing 93% of heat, trapping by the rising greenhouse gases emissions, and taking up 30% of our carbon emissions. But while climate change is having a devastating effect on our coastal communities, coral reefs, and the sea life, new research shows that the ocean can also be a source of innovation and hope in the climate change fight. Ladies and gentlemen, better integration of our ocean issues would unlock progress in the international climate efforts. Given the causal connection between the ocean health and climate change, greenhouse gases emissions are increasing ocean temperature. With a proceed of our physical and socio-economic effects, including the sea level rise, coastal flooding, redistribution of a fish stock, food insecurity, displacement of our coastal and island communities, degrading of our ocean ecosystem, and loss of our human livelihoods. Carbon dioxide emissions are also driving ocean acidification, which further threaten the marine spice and the dangerous food webs. Today, the world is while welcoming the United States of America into the Paris Agreement. We also looking forward, as today I think the President Joe Biden has announced the climate policy. We welcome it because it will be add the more efforts. Today, the governments are making their pledge. That pledges is not enough for us because if you will see, the young generation are on marches, on strikes, and they are waking up us, the older generation, to be wise towards our climate, towards our earth, and towards our oceans. This is not a small thing that we are not considering, that what our youth and young generation are doing. They are doing it what we have to do. Ladies and gentlemen, at the same time, ocean ecosystem can affect climate change and the resilience of the human communities and economics. This is the more important thing, that our mangroves, forest, seagrass, meadows, and salt marshes, for example, can capture and store significantly more carbon than the territorial forest, which while also defending the coastal line from the storms and flooding. Protecting and restoring these ecosystems is therefore an essential strategy for the mitigation and adapting to the climate change. To date, the climate agreements have springly recognized the role that the ocean can play in addressing climate change. The United Nations Framework Convention on the climate change, UNFCCC, mentioned that the ocean amongst ecosystems that serve a carbon sinks. Similarly, the Paris Agreement notes the importance of ensuring the integrity of all ecosystems, including ocean. The importance of this preamble. Meanwhile, although there are many countries, including reference to the ocean, in their first set of a national climate goals under the Paris Agreement, they were often in the context of a climate impacts rather than the climate solution. In my opinion, today, world must accelerate efforts for addressing the following points of coordinating efforts and as a collective responsibility toward the ocean-related climate issues. Reversing the loss of a blue carbon ecosystems. 2, addressing the ocean acidification, creating and managing the marine protected area, promoting the food security, collaborating on the green ports and reducing the shipping emissions, supporting the green infrastructure for coastal protection, cooperating and survival plans for climate threatened marine species, And the most important, at the last, establishment of an adaptation center for ocean climate. This is the most important. Few days back, I was in a World Summit on climate, invited by the Prime Minister of Netherlands. For climate change, there is an adaptation center, and adaptation has been taken up by the many countries. But for the ocean, we have to focus that there should be adaptation center to be established, which should address the impacts of ocean life and oceans issues related to the climate change. Despite the significant role that the ocean plays in the mitigation and adapting to climate change, the ocean is still not a mainstream topic for the climate diplomacy, which we have to strengthen it. If we are not going to strengthen the climate diplomacy, in the climate diplomacy, the ocean integration, then it will be our more disastrous step. Climate policy globally, which could be the next major step forward in the international climate efforts. Ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to hear all the solution, but my fellow colleagues has been given here. I am letting you know that the Pakistan, government of Pakistan has stepping up the coastal line and marine line, and they have invested in many forms to protect our coastal line, which is more than 800 kilometers. And we are developing the ecosystem for to protect the marine life into our coastal lines, and we are stepping up with the world and to invest into the climate issues. I mean, for example, we are stopping up the coal plants by 2030. We had planted the billion tsunami tree project effectively, which has been addressed by the whole world by the appreciation remarks. We, being as a human, being as a part of this earth, we have a responsibility to go beyond the means. We have to educate our children. We, from the small step to the largest step, let us discuss also that how much small steps we can take up on a national level, on a community-based level, which can affect the system, ecosystem. So this is my humble submission to all of you. Thank you very much. Once again, I'm appreciating the whole team of the Ocean Conservancy. They are doing a dynamic efforts. International Human Rights Commission is standing along with all of our young generation, those who are advocating for the climate change and ocean protection, as well as to you. If there is no pandemic, I may suggest that the International Human Rights Commission will hold your World Conference in Pakistan as a sponsor. So next time we will do more coordinated efforts so that our Earth can be saved from the man-made disaster which we are responsible for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you for that great reminder about the responsibility that we all have and who we are doing this for, the future generations, and we need to take action. So thank you. It is really my pleasure to thank all of you for sticking with us. I would finally just like to call out, there are a number of organizations that have supported the planning of the last 2 days. You've seen and heard from a lot of them today, but my name's Anna Maria, I'm from Ocean Conservancy, but this would not have been possible without also the United Nations Foundation, NRDC, Pew Charitable Trusts, EDF, RARE, the Ocean Climate Platform, IDA, the Blue Carbon Initiative, the Because the Ocean Initiative, Conservation International, and IUCN. Thank you so much to all of our partners, and thank you again to all of the hosts and all of you for joining. We will be sending recordings of both days of the summit to everyone who has registered. Thank you all for attending.